start. I'll start with some housekeeping. Well, thank you all for coming. Just a quick note, bathrooms are out to the right outside the door. And if you need to use the facilities, and there's some snacks and waters at your, in the back and at your table. So we're going to get started right now. Xin chào các bạn. Ladies and gentlemen. Tôi tên là Gregory Harris, Tùy viên thương mại đến lãnh sự quán Hoa Kỳ ở thành phố Ho Chi Minh. Tôi đại biểu Bộ Thương mại Hoa Kỳ. And it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the 2024 Vietnam USA Containerized Trade Symposium here at the Sheraton Saigon Hotel. We really appreciate you coming, and we have a good lineup of expert speakers that you can not only listen to, but network with to learn about the state of industry and trade between U.S. and Vietnam. We are delighted to have Vietnam representatives from the Vietnam Consulate in San Francisco, Ministry of Industry and Trade, and we thank you for coming, Consul. And representatives from UWL, Swire Shipping, the Journal of Commerce by S&P Global, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which has quite a few members, Union Pacific, and Ashley Furniture. Did I miss anyone? No, I think I got everyone. So a lot of experts. It's going to be a great program. I want to start by thanking Chris and UWL for working with us and to organize this program. There's a lot of people behind the scenes, and at the end of the day, we're going to let you know who they are because they are so important to make this event happen. So they're trying to hide right now, but we won't let them hide. We will make them get their due recognition. So today is a very auspicious day to talk about U.S.-Vietnam trade and collaboration. This morning, I am pleased to report that the bilateral relationship between U.S. and Vietnam has never been stronger. If you haven't heard, in September, President Biden came and met with General Secretary Tran, and the U.S.-Vietnam relations was upgraded 2 steps to the highest level in the Vietnamese government's foreign relations hierarchy, comprehensive strategic partnership. It is very important because we jumped 2 tiers, and now we have to make this upgrade in relationship a reality on the ground, and that's where we count on all of you. Both sides pledged to cooperate deeper, to help each other develop, to bring more trade and investment between the 2 countries. In 2022, there was about $139 billion in two-way trade between U.S. and Vietnam. 2023 figures not out, maybe a little lower, but we expect recovery in 2024 from trade to the real estate market here to several other industrial and economic sectors. So we look forward to a good year in 2024. So if you're going to be shipping and moving stuff around and doing trade, let's get started with the experts we have here today. It's an important topic, and it's really the backbone of this relationship, U.S. and Vietnam. Trade is so important to helping both our economies grow and making our countries stronger, a more resilient supply chain, which both countries want. So I would like to express my gratitude to all the participants, speakers, and especially the guests for coming to share some time with us. As for us in the U.S. Consulate and U.S. government, we will continue to support stronger ties with the government and people of Vietnam. and it's been my pleasure to work with the team to work on this symposium, and I know it's just going to be a wonderful event. Now, I'm going to finish with that and introduce our really our super VVIP guest from the the Vietnamese Consulate in the U.S., Ministry of Industry and Trade. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Tran Thang, the representative of MOIT. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Greg. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I'm honored to participate in today's Vietnam-USA Containerized Trade Symposium and share with you the significance of the trade relationship between Vietnam and the United States, particularly in the field of import and export through U.S. seaports, including the Northwest seaports. The symposium today serves as a platform for dialogue, exchange of ideas, and forging stronger ties between Vietnam and the United States. Over the past years, the United States has been crucial import and export market for Vietnam. Specifically in 2023, Vietnam export to the US with a total value of $97 billion US. In terms of import, Vietnam imported nearly $14 billion US from the United States. Taking the advantage of the geographical location, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean in the east to the Pacific Ocean in the west and the Gulf of Mexico in the south, the US seaport system is a vital part of the US national infrastructure, playing a pivotal role in connecting the United States to the global markets, generating millions of jobs and making significant contribution to the economic prosperity of the country. The entire US country has up to 360 commercial ports, including major ports such as Los Angeles, Long Beach, Seattle, Tacoma on the West Coast, New York, Virginia on the East Coast, and Houston, Savannah in the South and Southeast. The seaport system is connected to the consumption, production, and distribution centers nationwide through a transportation network involving railways, roads, and inland waterways. Northwest seaports situated strategically along the West Coast serve as a crucial gateways for international trade. The ports have excellent transportation connectivity with major highways, railroads, and international airports, which is Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. This port, equipped with the state-of-the-art facilities, provide an efficient route for exchange of goods between nations. As we look to strengthen our economic ties between Vietnam and the U.S., the connectivities of the Northwest seaports become an imperative. The road and railroad networks that extend from these seaports to the Midwest regions act as the vital arteries, ensuring swift and reliable transportation of goods, creating a seamless supply chain that reaches deep into the heart of the country. This ensures that the goods from Vietnam can reach their destination in the U.S. in a timely manner, reducing transit times and costs. The enhanced connectivity opens up a diverse trade opportunities. Business on both sides can explore new markets and products, fostering mutual beneficial relationship that goes beyond traditional trade boundaries. Importantly, by optimizing the use of Northwest seaports and their connected road and railroad networks, the United States and Vietnam can strengthen their comprehensive strategic partnership. This collaboration is not only economically beneficial, but also contributes to the diplomatic ties between the two nations. Our distinguished speaker and panelists of the symposium today will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table, offering valuable insights that will undoubtedly shape the meaningful discussions. I encourage each participant to actively engage, exchange thoughts, and contribute to the success of the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Tang, for the opening remarks and for traveling all the way from San Francisco and supporting our event. We very much appreciate it. And welcome, everybody, to the Vietnam USA Trade Symposium. My name is Krawczyk, and I'm going to be the moderator here for this first session. Before starting our first session, there are a few individuals that I would like to thank as well for helping us put on the event. First off, the U.S. Commercial Service, the Vietnam Ministry of Industry and Trade, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, and welcome to Commissioners Cho and Commissioners McCarthy for joining us all the way from Seattle, as well as the Oregon Vietnam Economic, Educational, and Cultural Association for helping put this all on together. So over the next 3 hours, our speakers and panelists, experts in their own respective fields, will share insights, experiences, and forecasts that promise to inspire and reform. Our goal is to dive into key topics that are not only relevant to our industry, but also crucial for the broader understanding of the Vietnam to USA trade. And thank you to all of our panelists for joining us here today. What we've effectively tried to do is provide key insight from a number of different areas in the business. We've got the Journal of Commerce, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, we've got Union Pacific, we've got David Skillen, who's a longtime carrier background, as well as Ike Hoehn, who is a very large importer from manufacture in Vietnam to the United States. So respective ideas from each of you, and we look forward to that. So with the first session, I would like to make this very much a roundtable type of conversation. And Mr. Tran mentioned we are very open to questions throughout the period. So if you happen to have a question, certainly raise your hand, and we will have an individual come over with a microphone to ask the panelists. The first topic that I would like to start with is the current state of the U.S. economy. To kick it off with a question for Ike, but would also love to have Peter, John, and Sloder provide their input. Ike, furniture manufacturing is a major part of the Vietnam economy. Furniture imports into the USA has also traditionally been a leading indicator and predictor of the U.S. economy. Tell us a little bit about what you have seen, what you are seeing, and what you are forecasting as we make our way into 2024.
All right. Good morning. So I think what many of us have seen throughout 2023 is that the economy was difficult in comparison to previous years, and things were a bit slow, both on the U.S. side and then here on the Vietnam side for manufacturing and distribution, and ultimately for ocean freight. From our side, what we're seeing is that we're expecting 2024 to be kind of more the same. It's going to be a difficult economy still. For us and for many of the industries that are here in Vietnam, we do rely heavily on the housing market in the U.S. And as long as interest rates remain high, I think we can expect that builds and buys of houses in the U.S. will remain a bit slow. And so, there's some promise that the interest rates will start to fall throughout 2024, but that won't happen quickly. It won't impact the market necessarily quickly. So we are expecting 2024 to be still a bit slow, maybe stable compared to 2023. So not a very promising outlook from our side currently.
Peter, any thoughts from your perspective?
How's that? There we go. Okay. So from our point of view, and in talking about the economy, I would be drawing from the expertise of the economics team at S&P Global Market Intelligence, which is the business that the Journal of Commerce is part of. And just to put it into a big picture perspective, the U.S. economy performed in 2023 a lot better than people were thinking that it would. Inflation came down more quickly than was expected. There was no recession, even though many economists forecast a recession for 2023. It never happened. And as a result, a economy that was forecast back in April of last year to have grown, to be growing maybe at 0.5% last year, actually ended up growing at about 2.5%. last year. My colleagues at S&P Global, the economists, believe that next year growth is going to slow in the U.S. So the current forecast is that growth will be, this is GDP growth, will be about 1.5% next year. So 2.4% is where they think it came in for all of 2020, 1.5% for next year. At least that's the forecast as it stands right now, and that would be reflecting a lot of different factors. It reflects, higher interest rates, even though the Fed has started to indicate now that they will begin easing gradually. So that was a significant change in tone from the Fed last year. Probably one of the most important economic developments in the U.S. economy last year was this somewhat unexpected change in orientation by the Fed. But on the positive side, the stock market is doing very well. The stock market was off to the races when the Fed changed their tone. Our economists believe that unemployment is going to remain low and even go lower. So that will be positive. At the same time, we have an election year next year, which some of you may have heard may end up being a little bit tense and divisive. That is not a stimulus. That it will be is a dampening factor in the economy, all else being equal. And as Ike mentioned, even though the Fed is beginning to talk about easing, certainly the consensus and the view of our economists is that interest rates are going to remain high. They may ease a little bit, but they're going to remain high for most of 2024 and probably even beyond that. That's going to dampen housing. It's going to dampen real estate. It's going to dampen demand for consumer products that are tied to the housing market, which is a substantial portion of what's moving in the Transpac trade. So I've probably gone on for too long, but that's sort of a little bit of an overview of how we see it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And John, I'd love to get your feedback from a position of the ports and in particular Seattle and Tacoma.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So I agree with the comments made by the other panelists. I would add that, part of the trepidation that I see in the consumer market is, in addition to higher interest rates and what we're accustomed to the last few years, although one would argue that they're still lower than we've seen in the longer term history. The geopolitical issues that are at play globally also create uncertainty in the marketplace. And as a result of that, when there's uncertainty, consumers tend to hang on to their money a little bit tighter. And so I think that we will see that in 24. I believe that the Fed has, someone call it luck, landed the economy in a somewhat more stable manner, and that we may have avoided a recession this year. And I do believe that the Fed will soften interest rates, yet I believe that they'll be cautious about doing that. So I don't think that that will happen in the first quarter. I think that we're probably likely to see that maybe second, third quarter. And although they probably will reduce the rate, I don't think it's going to be a substantial reduction in 2024. So what that means is consumers have locked in very aggressive interest rates on their housing, and likely are going to hang on to their mortgage rates, and thus the market will be pretty tight in the housing industry, as Ike mentioned. From a port perspective, we're going to be cautiously optimistic. First half of the year is going to be, I think, flat in terms of volume as compared to this past year. Second half of the year, optimistically, I think that we could see a slight increase as we move into the peak season and in advance of the holiday season. So I would suggest that we may see about overall about a 2% growth in this year as compared to last year.
Thank you, John. Sloder, would love to hear your feedback from a Union Pacific perspective.
You sure you don't want to start with David? Okay. From rail perspective, actually 2023, we didn't had a very good year because most of the time of the year last year, the volume was down, on a year-on-year basis. Fortunately, entering quarter 4, the last quarter, finally there is some picked up, So I'm also cautious optimistic about this year, because obviously international trade has a lot of factors involving geopolitical, situation, and policymakers in the U.S., how they deal with geopolitics. That would all affect the trade domestically and internationally. Finally, after the quarter 4, our volume are reaching, overall railroads, the volume are reaching slightly 1 or 2% minus, to make up the most of the deficit last year. Still, the first 2 weeks so far is still looking good. Carload-wise, bulk cargoes, intermodal cargoes, they're almost 50-50 in volume-wise to each other. So they're both looking positive so far. So we hope that momentum continues. Yeah.
Do you feel that that is any sort of artificial bubble just based on the geopolitical climate and what we are experiencing in the Red Sea?
Here's the thing. In intermodal perspective, we deal with most of the consumer goods. Just like Peter mentioned earlier, actually, the economy in U.S. last year was not really that bad, in terms of retailing, consumers, consumption-wise. People still buy a lot of things, put it this way. So even with all the bad news, so I think the demand is always there, regardless. We're hoping that the momentum keeps that way, and people still need to buy something, even though they may be a little bit cautious or discretionary, but they still buy all the necessities they want. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and I think that kind of leads us into the elephant in the room and the situation going on in the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, and how that's impacting containerized trade, and not just in that part of the world. It's impacting all parts of the world. And you look at the Asia to European trade, which is the largest trade globally, and how that trickle effect impacts us from manufacturing in Vietnam and importing from Vietnam into the United States. So, David, I'd like to ask you the first question on this piece. You spent the majority of your career on the carrier side. Give us some insight into how these longer transit times will impact U.S. importers and exporters, and with these additional transit times, will that lead to equipment shortages and rolled bookings and increased chaos, particularly in ports such as LA, Long Beach, and others that during the COVID time became very backlogged?
Thank you, Chris.
Yep, you're good.
Hi, thank you, Chris. Hi, good morning, everyone. I think it may be worthwhile just stepping back a little bit and looking at how carriers have reached the point they're at today. So as you all know, during the COVID period, this was extremely beneficial for shipping lines. And between 2020 and 2022, I think all shipping lines made record profits. The level of profitability had never been seen before in the shipping industry. So when carriers have a lot of cash, what do? They order new ships. And to be fair to the carriers, a lot of these new ships that are being ordered were from a perspective of having ships which are more environmentally friendly than the ships we've had in the past. So running on LNG, for example. And a lot of carriers have a goal now to be carbon neutral by 2040 or 2050. So there was definitely a perspective that was not just simply we as carriers want to grow and have bigger vessels, but we want to have more environmentally friendly and more efficient vessels. So we have a situation now where this year there are something around 450 to 470 new vessels will be delivered to shipping lines. And that represents a total capacity of around 3 million TEU. So depending how you evaluate the total global trade, that's somewhere in the region of 8 to 10% of global trade. Now, as you've just heard from my fellow panelists, and particularly Peter, the growth in the US is going to be nowhere near 10%. Neither is the growth in Europe or in South America or in any other of the major export markets from Asia. So the issue that the carriers faced is that they have an extreme excess of supply. And I think, again, those of you who are shippers will have experienced already how the carriers have tried to deal with that. So they tried to deal with that by having what's called a blank sailing policy. So they simply take vessels out to try and create some kind of equilibrium between the supply and demand. But with the number of new vessels that are going to be delivered this year, it's estimated that it will take maybe 30 to 35% of all sailings to be blank sailings to achieve this balance. So if you take out more than 1/3 of all of the scheduled sailings, then you're probably not running a regular liner service. You're going back to having some kind of tramp schedule where the vessel may arrive or it may not arrive. So schedule reliability is going to be a major issue. So that's the situation the carriers were facing. Then suddenly we have this situation arising in the Red Sea. And of course, you never want to have a situation where you benefit from somebody else's misfortune. And I want to emphasize I'm not saying that at all. But from the carrier's perspective, this situation in the Suez Canal significantly helps them handle the excess demand that they have today. Because in effect, this is creating a natural blank sailing program. So Chris talked about the Asia-Europe trade, the biggest trade in the world, maybe around 350, 400,000 TEU per week moving in that trade. So now it's taking at least a week, maybe 10 days longer to get into North Europe, and maybe up to 2 weeks to get into the Mediterranean. So this means in order to maintain a weekly service, carriers have to introduce more vessels into that trade. So this uses up this excess capacity. But in the initial stages, what is the immediate result of these longer transit times, not only to Europe, but also to the US? The immediate result is that we see a shortage of capacity in Asia. So I think in next week, in the week beginning the 22nd of January, this is going to be one of the worst effective weeks, because in the Asia-Europe trade, there is some analytics which show capacity will be down by 30%. So this is not the carriers taking vessels out of the trade. This is rather the delay in the vessels coming back into Asia. And this will be the same in the US trades as well. And then Chris mentioned what impact is that going to have in terms of how carriers are managing bookings, managing allocations, and also equipment availability. So regarding the last point, regarding equipment availability, obviously this creates a huge issue because you are not getting the equipment back in Asia from the US or from Europe in the time frame that you were originally expecting that equipment to arrive. And also, as you know, because of the soft market conditions that we saw in the second half of last year, I think carriers have been a lot more flexible, and some of you may have benefited from this. Carriers have been a lot more flexible in allowing additional free time for containers at destinations. So the box is taking longer to come back from the consignee because the carrier is allowing 10 days or 14 days or maybe even 21 days free time. And then it's taking longer to come back into Asia because of these delays through the longer transit times. So what we're seeing, for example, in China is that container lease rates have gone up very significantly. And of course, the lease companies themselves are trying to benefit from this by insisting that the carriers take out long-term leases for containers. So not just 6 months, but maybe 2 or 3 years. So I think from a carrier's point of view, they're going to be focusing very, very clearly on utilization of equipment. And they're going to be looking at, if you have a contract with a carrier, and that contract is for 50 TU per week, they're going to insist that you use 50 TU, not 51, not 48, but 50. And that's something we saw during COVID. I think that disappeared in the second half of last year, but I think that's something we will see now coming back into the marketplace, with carriers being far more focused on equipment and on space utilization. In terms of how we see things moving forward, I mean, we also have to remember that in the situation when we had COVID, once COVID cleared up, it still took 6 months for the markets to go back to normal. So I've seen a lot of discussion in various press outlets to say, if the situation in the Red Sea normalized today, things would go back to normal tomorrow. That's not the case from the carrier's perspective. And so I think even if things in the Red Sea normalize this week, we will still see these problems for the first half of this year. So there's going to be an issue with schedule reliability, there's going to be an issue with container availability, and there's going to be a great focus from the carriers on ensuring that contracted space is fully utilized. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, David. You know, it's quite interesting, and Peter, I'd love to get your insight here. We've almost heard a little bit of conflicting information. The U.S. economy and imports are what everybody is predicting is going to be remaining flat. We've got excess capacity coming into the market, but we've got a situation where the carriers are utilizing that capacity to their advantage at the moment, and we've now seen an inflation in the rates. And one of the questions that we received prior to the event from a registrant was to talk about the rate levels and will this be sustainable, and kind of what is our outlook on 24, and how will it potentially impact the flows of the U.S. East Coast and U.S. West Coast coming out of COVID, where a lot of folks routed freight to the U.S. East Coast?
Well, just to pick up on what David said, because I think you, David, you made some very valid points. That you know, what has happened since early to mid-December is that the market experienced a significant shock when the ships started to be fired upon and when they started to reroute, and now 90% plus of container ships are being rerouted. So the impact on supply demand, the impact on transit times, the impact on normal network operations by the carriers, it cannot be denied was significant. And as we have seen with other prior shocks to the system, going back any number of years, go back to the Hanjin bankruptcy in 2016, any shock like that one will take, and that one did take several months to work through the system. So it doesn't matter what the shock is, because ships take many weeks to go from Asia to Europe or to complete a rotation. They don't move very fast. It will take a long time to unwind that. But you do see as that process plays out, and now I'm almost assuming that, because I don't know, none of us really know when security is going to be restored in the Red Sea. So I'm sort of assuming that it won't be restored. But that's not a judgment on my part. That's not any sort of expert analysis. I have no idea. I have no knowledge of military affairs or knowledge of naval operations or anything like that. But let's assume that just for the sake of argument, that the diversions continue for quite some time. Well, as that happens, you're going to see a normalization process occur, because this is completely a supply-driven shock. It's not a demand-driven shock, as we've heard. I think that the consensus here on stage is that there isn't going to be a big demand bump, even though demand is recovering. So if you look at the year-over-year import numbers starting in August or September of last year over year, September 23 versus September 22, October, November, December, what had been a declining trend has turned upwards, and we're now in a freight recovery mode. So we don't know yet what the full impact of that is, but let's just assume that we're in a still a soft demand environment. The networks will adjust. There's no reason to think, for example, that outside of maybe a little bit here and there, but we're not going to see significant port congestion develop as a result of what we're seeing. This is not the type of circumstance that will cause vessels to start backing up. But then, Chris, it gets to your point about East Coast, West Coast. So we were starting to notice, even before the attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, that there was potential pressure on the West Coast. Because every time that the longshore labor and the employers on the West Coast negotiate a contract, shippers have long experience, and they know exactly what's going to happen when those two sides negotiate, and there's going to be disruption on the docks. So quite a bit of cargo flees to the East Coast, and that's the reason why the market share of the East Coast has steadily grown over many, many years. It's one of the factors, as well as population shifts. But some of it also comes back, and it is coming back right now. So if you were to look at the fourth quarter of last year, you will see that the West Coast grew quite a bit faster than the East Coast. And that is that cargo that fled the West Coast during the last longshore labor negotiations coming back. Maybe even a little bit of cargo fleeing the East Coast because there's going to be a significant labor negotiation on the East Coast this year, and very unlike the East Coast Labor Union, because it's a different union on the East Coast. They are much less disruptive over a long period of time. Nevertheless, they have said that there could be a strike or there could be action. So that's going to get shippers to the East Coast a little concerned. So if you take those two factors, then you take the shortage of capacity on the Panama Canal, and then you look at what's happening here, all the ingredients are there for greater pressure on the West Coast, and I'd be very interested to hear my colleagues on stage if they agree with that.
John, what are your thoughts? As the leader of the Northwest Seaport Alliance and going through the ILWU negotiations and living through that, and then seeing what is coming down the pike, plus what's happening in the Panama Canal that Peter just mentioned.
Yeah, so going back to that time during the West Coast negotiations, I will say as a West Coast port, it was a very frustrating time because as port authorities, we do not have a voice at the table, yet we're impacted by the negotiations. So thankfully, we worked through that issue, and it was painful, and now we're putting that in the rearview mirror. I will say this as a port authority, and I think all of our supply chain partners, we have to build back the confidence with the shipping community that the West Coast is an effective gateway, and that consistent, reliable service and closing the gap on performance excellence is critical. So we've really doubled down our efforts coming out of what was a very difficult negotiation. Certainly, we are aware of the risk to the East Coast with the ILA negotiations forthcoming, and I think there's a lot of posturing going on right now. We'll see how that plays out. You know, we can we need to be careful not to play too much into that and really focus on ourselves and what we can do to make our gateway the most attractive gateway that we can. And again, I think that's where our focus is, because we don't control what happens on the East Coast. And we will be prepared, though, if in fact there is a shift of cargo or continued shift, as Peter mentioned, to the West Coast from the East and Gulf Coast. We're prepared. We're prepared with the infrastructure that we have and the investments that we're making. We're prepared with our operational performance, and we have underutilized capacity today, which isn't always a great thing, yet I would say that we're poised to answer the call in partnership with our railroad partners, the UP Railroad and the BNSF Railroad. And then, you know, the part that is really more a question for us on the West Coast is how the drought in the Panama is going to play out, and what does that mean from an ocean carrier standpoint? How are they going to adjust to that situation? And is that a prolonged situation, or is that going to be a short-term issue? And then, you know, obviously the tension in the Red Sea. So a lot of factors that are out of our control. And again, I bring us back to what we do control. And so we are meeting regularly with our workforce, our ILW workforce, our terminal operators, the railroads, and really doubling down our efforts in terms of operational excellence and making strategic investments for the future.
Excellent, thank you. And you know, Ike, I'd like to kind of throw this next piece over to you, and it ties into the U.S. East Coast question. Obviously, the U.S. East Coast is a major destination for furniture importers. It's a major destination for a lot of retail, footwear, apparel, you name it. So I visited here recently with a number of major importers who have already started to kind of reroute their freight in a risk mitigation aspect to the U.S. West Coast from the U.S. East Coast. Tell us a little bit more about your thoughts as a major importer and what you might feel others would do or will do here in the coming days and weeks.
I think one thing that became very clear to most companies during COVID was that diversification is key. And I think that's going to continue to be the focus going forward. Diversification in terms of where you're manufacturing or buying from in Asia, but also, you know, what partners you're working with. And so when it comes to East Coast versus West Coast, LA versus Seattle, New York versus Norfolk, I think you need to have as many options as you can if your business allows for it, right? If you have warehouses all throughout the country, you can't have all of your eggs in one basket. You have to be diversified. And even when it comes to from Southeast Asia to the U.S. East Coast, you need some via the Panama Canal, some via the Red Sea. You need to be diversified and have some volume with multiple different services, multiple different partners, so that if there's a problem with one of them, you're able to ramp up with the others. And so I think that is going to be the key going forward, because it seems like once one disruption comes to a finish, the next one starts. And so diversification, I think, is going to be the name of the game, as well as just having close partnerships with all of the different players within that supply chain to make sure that when you do need to react, you have the relationships to make that happen.
Excellent, thank you. And so, David, I'd like to kind of dovetail this into a question for you and get your thoughts on the U.S. East Coast, and if the situation continues to worsen, what potential impacts could this mean to LA Long Beach? We saw how disrupted that location got? And then Sloder, I'd love to have you kind of give us some feedback on the rail infrastructure on the West Coast and how that could potentially impact the rail infrastructure, in particular to Union Pacific and others, when we've already kind of seen a rail car disruption as well.
Thanks, Chris. As Peter said, the situation regarding the ports in the US and also the ports here in Asia in terms of congestion is not really clear yet. I mean, we've not seen any congestion so far, but as you know, carriers are now working with terminals generally with quite strict berthing windows. So there's a schedule in place for the carrier to arrive at the terminal. And if carriers start to consistently arrive outside of their berthing windows, which I think is something we can see happening with these longer transit times and the disruption in the Suez Canal, and also the issues in the Panama Canal now, where even though I think there was an unexpectedly heavier rainfall towards the end of last year, there are still a lot of restrictions on the number of vessels that can transit the canal during one day. So if we see this continuing, then I think we may start to see congestion building up because vessels will arrive out of their berthing windows. And in that kind of scenario, then this maybe will result in what we saw during COVID, where the smaller ports that don't have so many vessels calling at them actually become more operationally efficient. So I know, I don't want to sort of blow Seattle's trumpet too much here, but I think during COVID, Seattle was one of the ports which actually functioned very well. And whilst a lot of vessels were, up to one point, I think there were 60 container ships sitting off LA Long Beach. I think vessels could more or less berth at Seattle without waiting. So that provided a very good alternative gateway into the US. And we could easily see that situation arising again because of this schedule irregularity, which I think is going to be inevitable over the next 6 months, unless something dramatically changes in both the Suez and the Panama Canal.
Thank you. And so, Sloder, how do you envision this impacting the West Coast rail? And have you gotten or have you seen an increase in demand for mini land bridge, something that we're all probably very familiar with that terminology, but we haven't really seen over the last few years?
Thank you, Chris. As the U.S. Western Railroad, of course, we want to see more East Coast shipped back to the West Coast. But speaking for the Western railroads or Western ports, like John mentioned earlier, we have to prepare, ourselves first, operationally, so that we give confidence to our customers, to our partners, to come back to West Coast, no matter for what reasons. Actually, back in the second half of last year, we do gradually see some cargoes increase to the West Coast, regardless it's because of the Panama Canal issue or any potential expectation regarding East Coast issues, like Peter mentioned earlier, we did see some increase. But if you ask me, is there any sudden increase for mini land bridge, from West Coast all the way to the East Coast? Honestly, there's not much yet, because geographically it's still a long way, through the inland, and probably cost-wise, that may not be as competitive as the all other, So, and especially when most shipping lines, they all invest in their East Coast capacity, their routes, their fleet. So it's not like all of a sudden, they want to ship everything back, unless it's clearly a customer's desire or a customer's cargo rush. Otherwise, they still, most shipping line would still prefer to maintain their status quo on the East Coast deployment. So that would also affect how we, so that's my point of view right now. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And so just to kind of wrap up this section of the agenda, we've heard some great context about the state of the economy, the state of the trade. I'd like to ask each of you to share some brief thoughts on what your advice would be for Vietnamese exporters and importers on how to mitigate risk in their supply chain in 2024, specifically kind of regarding the U.S.-Vietnam trade. And I know that, Ike, you kind of touched on it here initially, and so if you wouldn't mind just kicking us off.
Sure. So beyond diversification, I think partnerships are the key thing. And most of us saw that during COVID. I think where you had close partnerships, you were able to make things happen. And so, looking into this year with the state of the economy, companies need to make sure that they have the stock arriving on time and, cost effectively. So I think leaning into key partnerships to make sure that you can get customizable solutions and leaning into partners who are flexible will be critical with the ongoing disruptions that we continue to see. So I think partnerships is really the focus for this year.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I totally agree with Ike. I think partnerships are really tested when times are tough. When the market's running very smoothly, then everybody can be a good partner. But now, really, when we're all under pressure, this is the time when you need to have a partner who's prepared to work with you and, as Ike said, to find a customized solution to your issues. From purely the carrier's perspective, I would suggest that one thing that you should look for wherever possible is direct services, because in this type of environment, having cargo that's moving over any kind of transshipment hub is just going to create another potential problem for you in terms of connectivity and schedule reliability. So I think direct services from Vietnam are definitely the way forward. I mean, we can see that over the last 6 months, the connectivity in terms of the number of direct services coming into Vietnam has increased quite significantly, and I think that should be very beneficial for Vietnamese exporters. Thank you.
Being as an inland transportation provider, I think our major focus is to make sure our facility, our infrastructure are ready for whatever condition comes. As Union Pacific, we provide a branch network all across 2/3 of the United States, west from the Mississippi. So we're always ready to provide all kinds of alternatives for our partners and also our customers. So I just want to say that we want to make sure that communication and visibility will be built upon, every stakeholders. So when a situation comes up, we know how and where to provide necessary assistance for our customers and our partners. Thank you.
Yeah, building off what I've heard, I agree with the colleagues up here that partnerships are critical. I think one of the things that we benefited coming through the pandemic is we got to know each other a little bit better because we had to, and it was a very difficult time. And I don't want, as a port authority, to forget those difficult lessons learned. So our commitment to our customer base right now is that when you call on Seattle-Tacoma as a gateway, one, you're going to have premier infrastructure to support the movement, efficient movement of your cargo. And so we continue to invest in that infrastructure, and we need to stay ahead of the game. And then the second thing is extreme levels of customer care. And the way in which we can do that in an improved fashion over previous times is forecasting, looking ahead, and anticipating what's coming a few weeks out so that we can be prepared, whether it's the Port Authority, our terminal operator, the trucking, the rail partners, everyone working together to make sure that when that vessel calls our port, that cargo is moving efficiently. And so that's our area of focus right now.
Thanks, John. Just very briefly, about 5 to 7 years ago, in this market, we started to see an influx of venture capital money come into this market, and it created a whole generation of companies called digital forwarders. And there was this intense push to digitize this international containerized environment, as if all you had to do was, just like you go on an app to have your taxi through Uber or Grab, that you're going to be able to do the same thing when it comes to ocean containerized freight. And that concept has proven to be completely false. The reality is that, and we heard it from some of my colleagues on stage, that partnerships are important, relationships are important, and it's very easy to say that relationships are important, but the fact is that, and David, you mentioned this, that actually the market forces in this industry pull apart relationships. They undermine relationships. They undermine trust. And yet, it's still the best shot that a shipper has to get cargo onto a ship and to actually be able to extract the value that you need from this system to keep your cargo moving, to be able to realize your revenue, to keep your supply chain moving, is by actually fostering relationships with freight forwarders, and in particular with ocean carriers, as hard as it is, and as often as those efforts get undermined by the market turning against you or the market turning negative. And so I think that the recent experience has really indicated that as hard as they are to build and maintain, relationships are critical, and a lot of effort should be put into that, as frustrating as it may seem at some time.
Yeah, really good thoughts on that. And certainly I want to be cognizant of the time, because I know that this is, a half day, and I don't, how are we doing on time right now? Do you happen to 5 minutes over? But I'd love to get any questions from the audience, if you happen to have any. Everybody's being very shy. I know there's questions. There we go.
And I encourage other people to ask questions, or next time we'll charge for entry. No, just one phenomenon, because I'm an amateur and you're all professionals. There was a cost because of the trade deficit, and I know there's some empty containers coming in, and a few years ago there was the empty containers, and containers costed so much. Is there a general price difference between what comes into Vietnam per container and what goes out? And how does a company adjust with that? How do you make money if one way's a lot cheaper than the other? You just have to charge more going out. So cost, how do you manage that?
Certainly there is a cost differential for imports and exports out of the United States, and I don't know if who would really like to take this on, maybe David, but to answer your question, Greg, absolutely, obviously in the United States we are not manufacturing hardly anything anymore. We're very much an agricultural country where we're exporting a good number of goods, where vice versa, you look at here in Vietnam and other Southeast Asia countries, and they're the manufacturing hub really supplying to the United States. Unfortunately, there is a very quite drastic cost difference at times. I think it was a little bit tighter here as about 30 days ago. But you can quickly see how from an import, meaning imports into the United States, can ratchet up really quickly based on geopolitical issues, where it seems that the agricultural exports out of the United States don't necessarily follow that same trend. So David, I don't know if you have any additional insight or input that you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, just maybe just very briefly. I think it's a very good question. I mean, obviously, container shipping works on a round trip basis. So in general, you can say that the outbound voyage, the export voyage out of Asia, more or less covers the cost of the whole voyage. So if you look in terms of the volume of cargo coming into Asia compared to the volume of cargo going out of Asia, it's maybe a ratio these days of 10 containers exported, 2 boxes imported. So 8 are coming in empty, and that's a cost that the shipping line has to bear. So this is something that all shipping lines take into account in their costing processes. And of course, the other major challenge is that the exports, for example, from the US, don't necessarily go to the areas in Asia where the carriers need the containers. So then, even though you do have an export move from the US into Asia, that may still then result in an empty move from that location in Asia to another location in Asia where there's more demand to export goods.
Yeah. Just a question on the vagaries of the weather versus political outlook. You spoke about the Panama Canal. Is there any view on the situation getting better in the next 2 or 3 months? Obviously, that would have a major impact on movement of vessels.
Peter, do you want to, by chance, take this one on from a Panama Canal perspective? I know that none of us are meteorologists up here, but certainly it's gotten better.
Yeah, so the typical dry season of the Panama Canal is now through the spring. So this is one of the biggest reasons why there was concern last year, was because the drought that was being experienced was not during the dry season. And now we're in the dry season. So it's, you know, the capacity has been cut back significantly through the Panama Canal. And I don't think anybody really knows, just like with the Red Sea. These are fundamentally unpredictable in terms of how that's going to play out. Because in Panama, if they get more rain, they're going to have more water to be able to move ships through the locks, and there will be less constraint on capacity. But when that will happen is going to be, even the meteorologists don't know. They're probably the worst predictors of weather.
So you're only going to give us bad news then, Peter, yeah? I mean, we've heard from Chris that the situation's slightly improving. I've been hearing about the Panama Canal for 9 months, so assuming there's 3 or 4 seasons a year in the Caribbean or in that part of the world, I'd like to see some empirical data. I know meteorological things are not certainly predictable, but we're all working about climate change here. So I think some data from some organizations about the Panama Canal, rather than just, I heard it, I see it, I can't predict it, would be quite comforting from a planning perspective, because that will have a major impact. Suppose there was a deluge of rainfall against the seasons, and we've seen a lot of weather against the trends over the last 100 years or 10,000 years. That would actually help us a great deal.
I mean, I think, Alan, that you have to recognize the fact that from a climate change point of view, we're in uncharted territory. That 2023 was off the charts in terms of records being broken, and in terms of a view of climate scientists that potentially climate change is even accelerating. So weather is normally unpredictable, but we're in uncharted territory here. That is a point that is often overlooked. And I think that when it comes to how the Panama Canal is going to play out, it makes it even more unpredictable to try to get a sense of how things will evolve, so that people like you and your company can actually engage in real planning. It definitely stands in the way of you being able to do that.
Yeah, and a lot of that, Alan, and I really appreciate you bringing this up, because it really ties into sustainability, which has been a very hot topic over the last 12, 18 months, which hasn't even been mentioned prior to that. And it's something that we anticipated and wanted to talk about in this panelist section here this morning, but obviously the Red Sea situation kind of took precedence over that. But it's something that I had asked each of the members who will be speaking individually here after this to really kind of touch on sustainability efforts to give some additional insight into that, because climate change is something that's happening very rapidly, and we all have a part in helping fix that.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're running out of time here. Just on the container availability thing, I agree with Mr. Skillen, and it's very interesting about the movement of trade around the world. But as we know, America absorbed millions of containers stuck in the ports for months on end during COVID. And to my knowledge, in Asia, the Asian manufacturer shares went quadruple in price, and the manufacturing the volumes of containers went through the roof. On that side of the equation, I would expect that there is a surplus of containers bouncing around, but of course the question becomes, where are they? Does David have anything to add to that?
I think as I mentioned before, I think that the immediate problem we're facing now is that the containers are not here in Asia. So I think Alan is correct. I think in terms of the overall supply of equipment, I think there's more than enough to cover the current demand, but the delay in getting the boxes back into Asia is what is causing the current problems.
Thank you, David. But I would point out that I haven't seen that in any of the commercial publications. All I've seen that there will be a problem in the disposition of containers. So I think that we're getting a panic-driven situation here. Yet again, I say this.
Very, very possibly. And that's kind of what I was wanting to try and understand and get feedback from, Alan, and kind of that initial, the economy's not necessarily booming at the moment, and there's excess capacity in. But I think it's a very valid point. Thank you for bringing that up.
So can I give to Michael, and then we'll be back to you.
Thank you. So yesterday, the JOC published an article, maybe it was 2 days ago, that carriers in the Asia-Europe trade lane have ceased contract negotiations for the year because of all the uncertainty with what's going on in the Red Sea. And I guess I can start with David. David, what's your perspective of how carriers are approaching this TP eastbound contract season? Certainly larger BCOs are probably past bid 1 or cycle 1. Maybe they're entering cycle 2. A month ago, the spot rate into the West Coast was $1,500. Now it's going to be $5,500, $6,500. So how do carriers approach this contract season? And then therefore, how would importers or exporters prepare for that?
Again, I think that's a very good question. I mean, purely from the carrier's perspective, I think right now they would like to conclude as many contracts as they possibly can as quickly as possible, because the market sentiment is in the carrier's favor. However, there is also a lot of feeling that once we get past Chinese New Year, we may see rates easing, and therefore negotiations might be, if not more beneficial for the shipper, at least on a more equal footing. So I think what carriers always want is to have a contract that is sustainable for the tenure of the contract. So something that can be respected by both sides, and neither the shipper feels that they're overpaying or the carrier feels that they're receiving less value than they should be for that contract. I think the issue now, as you've correctly highlighted, is there's been such a sharp increase in rates to both the East Coast and the West Coast, and an unexpected increase in rates as well, that this has, I think, caused a little bit of a shift now in terms of the time frame for the negotiation of the contracts. So as I said, I think carriers are very keen to try and see if they can sign up contracts as quickly as possible and lock in, maybe not this rate of 5,500 or 6,000, but lock in a rate which is certainly higher than they were expecting they would get in the last quarter of last year when they were budgeting for 2024. On the other hand, from a shipper's perspective, I would imagine that shippers are trying to, if they can, extend these negotiations so that they can get a better evaluation of what the market conditions are going to look like in March and April of this year.
Yeah, we saw that quite well last year during RFQ season, where it seemed that contract negotiations lasted longer than everyone would have anticipated. And so, Peter, I'd love to have you maybe interject a little bit on that as well.
I wouldn't have a lot to add from what David has said. I think that he nailed it. That the question will be is how if the Red Sea is not resolved and if diversions continue, the market will normalize around a new normal. But that will take time, and until it's resolved, there will be pressure on the market. There will be pressure on supply and demand, and rates will be higher. So it's almost a race against time, whether you're a shipper or a carrier coming at it from two diametrically opposite points of view. And so that's what's going to make the next couple months particularly interesting and revealing.
Thank you, Michael.
This is Ben from AmCham, Manufacturing Committee. I would like to continue the question from Greg before it drifts away, and also about cost and rate, as David mentioned. So the question is quite practical. I rather address this to IKEA, for example, because we're talking about changes in rate, and somehow, some way we have to put it in the budget. And the changes in cost is quite significant, even though the issue is in the Red Sea, but we're seeing some figures says even the cost from Vietnam to West Coast is increased up to 60% for cost per TEU. So in terms of, Ashley, did you have to put any increased number for logistic costs, like some kind of percentage? And what are your ratio to doing some add or minus in the next months to come?
You thought you were done with budgeting.
I won't speak to any specifics, but I think when it comes to the pricing and the swings in the containers, the key thing that I think most businesses are going to see, and what we've seen the past couple of years, is if the rates go higher, it needs to be passed on. And so what you'll see is if container rates go high, the products that are heavily influenced by the container rates, you're going to see the retail prices increase on the U.S. side, and ultimately supply and demand, you're going to see demand decrease. So that's the limit of what I'll say to that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Wolfe from SSAT terminal in Kaimep, a joint venture between VMC, Singapore, and SSA Marine from the US. I just would like to have two questions. The first one, we say about the trade from Vietnam to the US, to both West Coast and East Coast. We would like to know if any shock showing that the ratio between the East Coast and West Coast, the cargo from Vietnam to recently in the past maybe 5 or 3 years, recently we noticed the trend moving from West Coast to the East Coast because some reason in the past during the pandemic, because of the longshore, the union, some services are moving to the West Coast, from West Coast to East Coast. But recently, some also, because of Panama Canal, they're also moving back to the West Coast. And also for the Northwest, Tacoma, Seaport, I also saw the trend. Auckland also saw the trend during the pandemic. Some shipping line, because of the congestion in LALB, they moved to there. And one more thing, I also noticed the transit time from Vietnam to the West Coast rather shorter, fast compared with the East Coast. So this can be something that advantage. And also the ocean rate from here to the West Coast should be cheaper than the East Coast. The second question relating to Vietnam, because we noticed that the trade from Vietnam to US increased very much during the past 5 years after the tension between the US and China, the tension about the trade only. Many supply chain production moving out, diversification, not like us like before they produce a lot of furniture in Shanghai, in China, but moving to Vietnam since 2017 or 18. And we also saw the efficiency because of the cost in Vietnam, the bulk fee, everything in Vietnam still very competitive. So relating to Vietnam, recently we also noticed that, like Mr. David mentioned, that the direct service can minimize the risk during the supply chain. So in Vietnam now they also have some idea about develop transshipment port for the region. It means that maybe this can compete with the Singapore, Malaysia, or even in the South China. So from Mr. David, you have a lot of experience with the shipping line. So you can share something about your experience about this thing, for example, in Cái Mép Hà, or in Lạch Huyện, in Hải Phòng, or even in Ho Chi Minh City. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah. So I mean, I first visited Vietnam in 1984, and of course the port at that time was very different from what it is today. And as you mentioned now, I mean, the expansion we've seen in Ho Chi Minh Port has been quite tremendous. And I think carriers initially saw Ho Chi Minh as an opportunity to make direct calls. So a lot of carriers came into Vietnam, and then they realized actually the volume coming out of Vietnam was not sufficient. So they withdrew their calls from Vietnam, and Ho Chi Minh went back to being a feeder port. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I think Vietnam is in the top 10 in the world in terms of countries that have the most direct calls. So carriers have now changed their whole focus again and have said Ho Chi Minh has sufficient volume to warrant direct calls on major trade lane services. And I think that will continue. I think we will see carriers continuing to introduce mainline calls at Vietnam because the port infrastructure is now really, really efficient, and the volume from Vietnam has increased significantly, and I think from the carrier's perspective will continue to increase significantly in the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and take a quick, maybe abbreviated break. I know that we were planning on doing a 15-minute break in between these couple of sessions, but I know that this first session ran a little bit long. So if we could maybe take an abbreviated break, and we'll be back here in maybe 10 minutes.
Again today, and I have an opportunity as the CEO of the Northwest Seaport Alliance to share a bit about our gateway with you all. My name is John Wolfe, and with me today, I want to introduce a couple of my colleagues. First of all, we have two of our elected commissioners that were mentioned earlier, Commissioner Sam Cho and Commissioner John McCarthy. Can you stand and just wave? And then also with me today are two of my colleagues. Don Esterbrook is the Deputy CEO of the Northwest Seaport Alliance. Don. And Tong Zhu, our Chief Commercial Officer. Tong? Where's Tong? Okay. She's drumming up business for us as we speak. So I'm going to try and move through fairly quickly. I know we're a bit behind schedule yet. I want to make sure that I highlight the importance of our gateway, and certainly if there are a couple of questions, if time permits, happy to try and answer those as well. So for those that aren't familiar with our region, we are on the West Coast. Some that haven't been to or spent much time in the States, when they hear Washington, they think of Washington, D.C. Yes, Washington, D.C. is an important place, yet where trade happens is, for us, is on the West Coast, up in the Pacific Northwest. And our state of Washington is one of the premier gateways for trade in all of North America. We're consistently in the top 5, 10 ports for trade. And we have world-class companies right in our backyard, companies like Amazon, Boeing, Microsoft, Starbucks, Costco, and many, many others. And we're also #1 exporter through our gateway for aerospace products, wood products, and coffee, as well as many agricultural products, including apples and cherries and potatoes. And I was having breakfast the other morning, and I know that we have something in common here with Ho Chi Minh City in that I was able to enjoy some Vietnamese coconut coffee. So that was very good coffee, and so again, that connection between Vietnam and our state of Washington is very strong. So we are a region that has a limited local consumer market. And what that means is much of the cargo that flows through our gateway, both imports from Vietnam as well as exports through our gateway, moves inland to other markets via rail. And that is why the railroads are so critically important for us. The UP Railroad, which is represented here today, and the BNSF Railroad serve our gateway and allow efficient movement of cargo through our port facilities onto rail and serving those inland markets. We have tremendous access to those markets, and we have great partnerships, and we spoke about that earlier, and those partnerships are really important to us. So we work very closely both with our terminal operators and the railroads to have efficient movement of cargo through our gateway. So the Northwest Seaport Alliance was formed back in 2015. Prior to that, the ports of Tacoma and Seattle competed with each other as well as we competed with many other gateways in North America. And in 2015, our commissioners in Seattle and Tacoma came together and said there's a better way of serving our collective customer base. Rather than compete with each other, we formed a company called the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which essentially serves as a single gateway for supporting the logistics and the movement of cargo, both imports and exports, through our gateway. And that partnership is working really well today. So now we're 8 years into this marriage of the two ports. And it really is a strength for us because we have a broader playing field of terminal facilities and supply chain partners to serve our customer base. And as a result of combining our efforts, today we are the 5th largest gateway for trade in North America. So we're really proud of that effort and want to continue to support your needs through our gateway. One of the other unique factors about the ports in the state of Washington, different than many other ports around the United States, is we're an independent port authority. So what that means is we are not tied to state government or city government like many other ports. We're an independent port authority governed by our 10 elected commissioners, 2 of which are here today. And what that means in terms of the value proposition is that I believe we can be more nimble, we can make decisions more quickly, and we can, whether they're investments in our gateway or customer service initiatives that we're working on, through the work with our 10 commissioners, we can make those decisions very quickly without having to go to state, local government for approval. We also are able to keep the profits from our business within the port district and reinvest back into our gateway rather than have that feed through a state budget or a city budget. So those are strengths, I believe, of our model. So this is an exciting slide because here we are in Ho Chi Minh City, and I can tell you that today Vietnam is a very, very important trade partner with the Northwest Seaport Alliance, Seattle-Tacoma ports. it's fair to say that Vietnam is the fastest growing trade partner in the last 3 to 5 years through our gateway. And I wanted to point out that within our local community, the Vietnamese community is growing rapidly. And so that connection between our Pacific Northwest, state of Washington, and our Northwest Seaport Alliance ports, and our friends in Vietnam is a growing partnership. And we're really excited about that. And we're excited about the growth potential of trade between the Northwest Seaport Alliance and Vietnam. We have quite a number of different types of products that are imported through our gateway as well as exported through our gateway. And one of the strengths of our gateway is that we have a fairly balanced trade. Oftentimes you'll see at some of the major ports, you'll see a huge discrepancy of volume of imports as compared to exports. In our gateway, it's a much more balanced trade. We're one of the largest export gateways for trade in all of North America, and that's a strength for us. As we talked earlier, that two-way trade is really important because it drives equipment availability, ocean carrier services, and with our rail partners, that even flow of cargo to and from our port. Some of the top imports you can see here, it's primarily consumer goods. So when we look in our closets, the clothes we wear, the shoes we wear, some of the other items like furniture from our friends at Ashley, oftentimes we see that it's manufactured right here in Vietnam. And then on the export side, as I mentioned, we have a strong export market. We have a farming community in Eastern Washington where many ag products are grown and exported to feed the world. And some of those products are finding their way into Vietnam. And so you can see some of those products here on the screen. So what is fundamental about ports is investing in infrastructure. That is a pillar strength for ports, and we're no different as the Northwest Seaport Alliance. So we are investing heavily in our infrastructure to make sure that we stay ahead of the growth potential through our gateway. And some of the improvements are in terminals. I'll speak to some specifics in a moment. Also our waterways. It's really important as the vessels are becoming larger and larger that we invest in the waterways and deepen our waters. We have natural deep water in Puget Sound, so we don't have the requirement for regular maintenance dredging. Yet, as the vessels become larger, we do have a plan to deepen our waterways to some of the deepest water in all of North America. And then certainly beyond our terminals, we need to invest in the road and rail infrastructure. And we do that through partnerships with the local governments, the state and the federal government, as well as in great coordination with our rail partners. And so that combination of investment, both our investments and those investments with our partners, is what makes this gateway so strong. And I can tell you that our investments over the next 5 to 10 years will exceed $1 billion easily. So this is real money, and it's money well spent, and we're really excited about the future of our gateway. So specifics that I mentioned are here. We are expanding our terminal capabilities, and one of the unique factors about our gateway is we do have room for growth. If you look at places like Southern California or maybe even New York, New Jersey, some of those larger metropolitan areas, they really struggle to expand their footprint of terminal capacity. So the way in which they grow is they densify their terminals, and then they look to inland terminal developments for ways to expand their volume. Well, we do that too, yet we also have the added advantage of expanding our terminal capabilities in our Seattle-Tacoma harbors because we have industrial lands that have not been fully developed. And so we have a robust plan to expand our terminal capabilities in both harbors. And in Tacoma, we are working on an expansion of a couple of our terminals. And then in Seattle as well, we just finished about a $500 million investment in what we call Terminal 5. It was a redevelopment of an existing terminal and expansion of that terminal capability And all of our terminals have, international terminals have on-dock rail service. And why that's so important is speed to market. So when that vessel comes in and is discharging the imports, the rail infrastructure is right there on the terminal. So that cargo does not need to leave the terminal to get onto rail and head off to those inland destinations. So that's a real efficient characteristic of our facilities in both harbors. I mentioned the deepening of the waterways. Today, our water depth is naturally about 51 feet. We're going to take that to 57 feet in both harbors over the next 5 to 8 years. And that will allow for the largest vessels to call our gateway without any impediment of water depth. And so that's an exciting investment for us as well. We're also investing in inland terminal facilities, and I mentioned that. So we have strategically identified inland markets where the export opportunities are located, and in partnership with those local communities, we're making strategic investments where we can capture those exports and set up distribution centers for the imports, so there's two-way trade via rail. So that's a unique characteristic that we offer as well. So we've got wonderful service offerings on the ocean side, and I really want to highlight the service and the partnership with Swire UWL because it's a unique service offering with that express service right here in Vietnam to Seattle Harbor. And that is a service offering that emerged during the congestion coming through the pandemic, and it has been a sustainable model for us, and we're really proud of it because it's a unique service offering that is provided to our gateway, along with the many other service offerings that are provided by all of the carriers, the large international carriers that call in the Trans-Pacific trade. We have, as I mentioned, little to no port congestion today. The capacity is great and growing through our gateway, and the utilization of our terminal facilities and our infrastructure is approximately 50% today, so we have a lot of headroom for growth. And so if you're looking for an alternative gateway to some of the other gateways in North America, look to Seattle Tacoma, because we do have capacity and we do have great partnerships in those rail connections to those inland markets. So in addition to that, and I've touched on some of this, we have a great investment in what we call transloading facilities. So much of the cargo that moves through our gateway, again, is moved through the terminal, loaded to rail, and onto those inland markets. In addition to that, we have a growing investment in these transload warehouse distribution facilities. And what happens is for that set of customers that choose that model, they take it to a local warehouse, which is miles from our terminal, so a close distance. They strip the cargo out of the international container, and then they repackage it to those inland destinations in a domestic container. And then we have the domestic rail service right adjacent to our terminals. So it's a really efficient model, and one that more and more importers, BCOs, are using as a model through our gateway, and a real growth opportunity for us. And we have one of the largest transportation distribution centers on the whole West Coast, second to Southern California. So it's a great network of partners. This is something that I want to spend a moment on because I think it's part of what defines us as the Northwest Seaport Alliance Seattle Tacoma. I will say, and I'm not, I don't think I'm being biased, that we are one of the premier gateways in all of North America in terms of customer care. We place a tremendous value on this effort, and we talked about it earlier. It's about partnerships. We certainly can't do it alone, yet I will tell you, each and every day, our team rolls up their sleeves, comes around our terminal operators, comes around the road and rail network, and the partners there with the railroads, the trucking community, our labor partners. We meet on a weekly basis with all partners, looking at the operation, breaking that down, and finding ways to improve efficiency and lower cost. So we have been recognized in the industry as a leader in this area. And I will tell you, we're not perfect, yet believe we're closing the gap in terms of extreme customer care. And we're smaller gateway than, say, Southern California or New York, New Jersey, so I think we're more nimble. We can respond more quickly to the customer needs. So again, if you're running into challenges, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to work with you on your logistics needs. And to that end, here are some testimonials from some of our valued partners that have expressed what I was just talking about. So this isn't just us self-proclaiming being one of the best-in-class gateways. We've been recognized and through awards that we've received, and many of our customers have shared with us that when they use the Seattle-Tacoma Gateway, they have a unique positive experience. And again, we're always looking at ways to improve that experience. So Chris touched briefly on this and asked us to highlight some of the environmental initiatives that we're working on for a more sustainable logistics solution. We are known as the Evergreen State, and we take pride in, as we grow our gateway and the volume and the jobs that come with it, that we also do it in an environmentally responsible manner. I think we're leaders in the industry, and we have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in our network to make sure that as we grow, we do it in a sustainable manner. Some examples of that: we are investing shore power at all of our international container terminals. So when the ocean carriers call, they have the ability to plug in to shore power. And the power that is generated through our state of Washington is clean energy. It's hydroelectric energy, so it is clean energy. And so that speaks volumes to the value proposition that we offer. Also, we're working with our terminal operators. SSA is here today. They are a valued partner in our Seattle Harbor, and we work closely with all of our terminal companies to look for ways to convert the diesel equipment to electric equipment, and that's a work in progress. It's a very expensive transition, yet we lean on state and federal grants to help offset the cost of that effort, and we've got some great success stories there and more work to be done. As well, we're working with our trucking community, the drayage community. As we move forward, we expect that we will have electric vehicles, drayage trucks through our gateway. That's probably a 10-year plan or maybe even 15-year plan, yet we are working diligently with the trucking community, and we want to be practical about this because it needs to make sense. And the infrastructure needs to be there, as well as the technology. And so in Seattle-Tacoma, we do not have regulatory requirements that explicitly say, Port, you will reach this goal by this point in time, yet it's a voluntary program, which is different than some of the other gateways. And I think that's a unique service offering as well, because it's through these partnerships and working together in a collaborative manner and being practical about how we achieve zero emission goals rather than setting arbitrary timelines that none of us can meet. And we are in a sustainable mode within our gateway, so we are achieving today the regulatory requirements for clean air. We also have partnered with Busan. You've probably heard about Green Corridors. So our partnership with Port of Busan is the first of probably many Seaport Alliance partnerships to establish Green Corridors. So that's a work in progress as well. So in closing, I think it's important for me to share with you the value proposition and summary of why you should take a look at Seattle-Tacoma as one of your many gateways in North America. First of all, again, I want to highlight and thank the partnership with our UWL and Swire friends that are here today, along with the UP Railroad. And that is just one example of many where we come alongside our partners and work collaboratively together to provide efficient solutions and alternatives that make sense for you as a shipper. We also, as I mentioned, have expedited inland transportation service offerings, again, through the railroad partnerships. And consistent, reliable service is critically important. And we know coming through the pandemic, I would say that none of the ports had consistent, reliable service. So we're recovering from that. We're recovering from what was a difficult negotiation with the West Coast labor contract. That's a 6-year agreement. So good news is we have some stability on the West Coast. And I believe that we, again, are earning back the trust of the importers and exporters that use our gateway. And that's why I'm so optimistic about our gateway. We have our work cut out for us, yet we are a unique service offering on the West Coast to the Southern California gateway option. And so again, I would encourage you to take a look at our gateway, and if you have questions, see us afterward, or you can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you with your transportation needs. So in closing, when you think about shipping, think Northwest Seaport Alliance. And I will check with Chris. Happy to take a couple of questions if time allows. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to program leads. Any questions?
I have a quick question in regards to the alliance and how it's being formed. Could you share a little bit more on how you were being competitors before and becoming an alliance for the port, and could we replicate this model in Vietnam with the existing port from north to south of Vietnam?
Sure. So prior to the formation of the Northwest Seaport Alliance, I had the honor to serve as the CEO of the Port of Tacoma for a number of years. And so, as I mentioned, we would compete not just with the other gateways around North America, with our neighbors in Seattle, and we would try and attract cargo and shipping services from Seattle, and they would do the same. The challenge with that is that as you're making investments in infrastructure that are hundreds of millions of dollars, you run the risk of making that investment and having highly underutilized assets. And so we had that experience right in Puget Sound because Tacoma was making investments independent of Seattle. And as a result, we were apt to create more capacity than we needed. And then we would compete with each other, and the primary way to compete is to drive rates down, which is not sustainable, because when you have rates that are not sustainable in any part of the supply chain, service delivery really fails. And so in 2015, as I mentioned, the commissioners, elected officials in Seattle and Tacoma came together along with key staff. So I had the ability to sit with the commissioners at that time, along with the CEO of the Port of Seattle, and figure out a new solution. And what we did is we stepped back and we said, hey, we serve this region, the great state of Washington and beyond, and there's a better way to do this for us to compete with each other. And as a result of probably a year's worth of negotiation and really interesting conversation, and looking at very different kinds of models, we came up with this model where the ports did not merge. So the ports of Seattle and Tacoma still exist as separate entities. What we did is we took the cargo activities of the two ports and we brought those together, and the assets that support those cargo activities, and formed this public development authority by state law. So this new enterprise is independent of the home ports. So our team reports up to the 10 elected officials, and then the home ports still exist. And the home ports also operate as our funding mechanism. So when we bring forward a request for infrastructure funding, we go to our managing members, the commissioners, the 10 commissioners, and upon approval, the home ports fund that investment. And then all proceeds from the activities, all operating income flows back to the home ports on a 50-50 basis to invest in the future of our gateway. Could this be replicated elsewhere? Sure. It's not a structure as I see it for everyone. You know, there's a saying out there that if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. So it fit well for us. I don't know that it would fit well for other ports, and I'm less familiar with the port infrastructure here in Vietnam, yet I do think it's a model that is an example of collaboration that supports better movement of cargo for our customers. And our customers, I do believe, benefit from this because, again, we have a larger playing field with greater set of assets to meet with our customers' needs. And so I'm really proud of the team and the commission that made some difficult decisions to bring this together.
The first one for the Seaport and Tacoma, what is the annual capacity of your two terminal combined? And how about the utilization for last year? How many percent? Yeah, in zero. And the second one is about what is the biggest container vessel size that the terminal can accept? Let's say 20,000 TEUs or maximum. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so first question about what is our overall capacity within the gateway and what was our utilization this last year. So I'm going to give you a rough estimate because it varies depending upon mode of operation, but I would say a rough estimate of our total capacity today would be around 6 million TEUs. And this last year, we handled about 3 million TEUs. So I mentioned that we're at about 50% utilization. Yeah, so we have plenty of room for growth without making any additional investment. That doesn't mean that we're not making investment. We are, yet we do have about 50% capacity today. In addition to that, you asked a question about what size vessels can call. It depends on the terminal. Yet, with the investments we've made in Terminal 5 in Seattle and Husky Terminal in Tacoma, those terminals can handle the largest vessels that would call our gateway. The limiting factor right now is probably the water depth only because of our exports, heavy exports. That's why we're going to take the waterways down to 57 feet. But with that, we could handle 24,000 TEU vessels. Now, to be clear, we don't have that size vessel calling our gateway today. The largest vessels that are calling our gateway are the 15,000 TEU vessels. And much of that is driven by the fact that, again, we have a smaller regional consumer market combined with the upper Midwest service offerings. So it would be difficult today to justify probably a carrier putting a larger vessel into our gateway. So you typically see those large vessels calling Asia-Europe trade and certainly in North America, probably more LA Long Beach. What happens is as the ocean carriers make those decisions to upsize in those service areas, then we see a cascading effect and we experience larger vessels calling our gateway as well. Yeah. Okay, any other questions before we wrap up? Well, thank you all again for your attention, and we are here throughout the afternoon, so if you have other questions, please look us up. And with that, Chris, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, John. For the next part of the presentation, the seminar, we really want to introduce the masses to a collaborative partnership that we created with Swire Shipping here about 2.5 years ago that we mentioned earlier, David Skillen mentioned earlier about direct services from Vietnam to the United States, this being one of them. And so Tom, go ahead and lead us off on this. And
Thank you, Chris. That was loud. I'm a relative newcomer to this particular Swire Shipping service. Hello, my name's Tom. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Swire Shipping. But actually, being here today and listening to those of you involved in speaking so far today, our panelists, who I thought were very informative, our partners at NWSA, and other partners who have spoken throughout the day. it kind of struck home to me why this particular shipping product is actually a really easy one to be enthusiastic about and to kind of get behind and sell. This is a genuine kind of innovative, customer-centric shipping solution that we are, between Swire Shipping and UWL, really proud of. Born out of the COVID supply chain frustrations, shipping first started on this product in December, I think Christmas Day itself.
Yeah, Christmas Day 2001.
2021.
2021.
And 2001 would be,
that would be
slightly
incredible.
pre-COVID. And we've landed on this 3-ship, fixed day fortnightly express service between Vietnam and the Northwest Pacific, between Seattle. And it's something that we're really excited to be able to talk to you about a little bit more today. Chris and I will explain how Swire Shipping is involved, how UWL is involved throughout the presentation. There'll be a little bit more Chris than me today. But with that, I'll pass over to Chris to get us started.
Yeah, so as Tom mentioned, it's a partnership between Swire Shipping and UWL. And prior to the launch of our service back in December of 2021, not a lot of the shipping community had heard of UWL. Mid-sized NVOCC in the United States, but surprisingly, we have a great breadth of services in the United States to offer door-to-door solutions. So headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio, you can see here the 6 core divisions of the organization. We've got multiple drayage divisions. We're actually a top 5 drayage provider in the United States through Container Port Group. UWL is the NVOCC and the customs brokerage arm of the organization. So it's the one entity within the organization that can sell the portfolio of services. And then to really kind of round it out, we have our own warehouses. So we have 5 core warehouses in the United States, about 2.3 million square feet of distribution space, primarily in Seattle, in New York, in Norfolk, and Savannah on the East Coast. And then our actual founding division was World Shipping, founded back in 1960. So we're a privately held organization, 2nd generation family owned. And as we started exploring this venture with Swire Shipping, the core values, the similarities between the two organizations were quite similar. And so Tom, I'll let you take it on about Swire Shipping.
Thanks, Chris. Before I talk about Swire Shipping, I'll talk a little bit about the Swire Group. So it's interesting talking to a few of you today. There are people in this room today, people who have already spoken, who have connections going back to some of my colleagues in the Swire Group from the 80s, in places as diverse as Japan, all across Asia. And to those people, we're very familiar as a group. But there are those of you in the US, we're slightly newer to you all. So the Swire Group itself, like UWL, is a primarily family-owned, controlled business, but we are actually a big publicly listed business in Hong Kong. Some of the bigger brands that we own and operate, Cathay Pacific, the airline, the flag carrier, in effect, of Hong Kong. We've got the bottling franchises for Coca-Cola all across China, most recently in Vietnam, actually. We've just celebrated 1 year, I think, of that franchise. We've got shipping businesses, we've got property businesses. So it's a big, diversified global group. But as I said, family owned, and the family really started in shipping. 150 years in shipping. Now we're across 3 or 4 different shipping products. We've got our traditional liner shipping business, which its strength is really the Asia-Pacific region. We're very strong in niche markets like Papua New Guinea and Fiji. We've also got a project heavy lift business, really targeting the energy transition that's happening globally. We've got this express product, which we do in conjunction with UWL, and then separately we also have a bulk shipping business. So it's a diversified and really quite large group, known to a lot of you in Asia in particular, but really making our way now in the US. We've just, as I said, we've launched this service as of 2021, and we've also newly acquired a business called Westwood Shipping, which is familiar to those of you in Seattle and Tacoma. So that's a little bit about the Swire Group and Swire Shipping and how we fit into this piece. In terms of our relationship with UWL, it's a long-term partnership. We are the shipping line, the owner, the operator of tonnage, and UWL is our NVOCC partner. A genuine partnership that we've just renewed. We see so many similarities, and they do things that we don't do so well, and we do a few things that they don't do, and we see ourselves continuing and growing this product for many, many years to come.
Yeah, and so just a little bit about where it all began, and I know that I'm going to give a shout out to Rufus here on this, because it was actually a bit of a brainchild between the president of our organization, Duncan Wright, and a gentleman by the name of Rufus Freer-Smith, who I just met, an individual who happened to know Rufus, and so we were just chatting about him. But it happened during the height of the pandemic. We all saw a lot of carriers enter the market very opportunistically, and we wanted to be very, very strategic about how we did this. We saw a situation where a lot of the carriers began to migrate their tonnage toward China and away from Southeast Asia. And it left a gaping hole in everybody's supply chain, even worse. And we had the relationship with Swire, we began building on it, and it originally started out as a direct shuttle service from Seattle to Ho Chi Minh. As we began to build and have conversations, the next question was, well, if you're going to Ho Chi Minh, can you make a stop in Haiphong? There are a couple of pillars here that I will talk about here in just a moment, but the key to our service is reliability. If we make any decisions, the number one question is it going to affect the integrity of the schedule? And if the answer is yes, then it's a hard stop. And so we were able to not slow steam on the westbound service at Haiphong as a call. And effectively, this is really where it all began. And so I mentioned reliability here a second ago, and I'm going to go into each of these a little bit more in the next few slides. But it was built on these three uniques: reliability, guarantees, and speed. The traditional carriers in the market have an on-time performance of around 60%, and everybody seems to be okay with that. Our question was, how can we improve that? How can we be a better service to importers and exporters out of the United States to and from Vietnam? So reliability. Number one, we talked about blank sailings earlier in the presentation. Contractually agreed upon, there are no blank sailings. We post our sailing schedule 9 months in advance, and we sail when we say we are going to sail. We've got fixed departures at origin and destination. And a lot of this stems from the reliability or the partnerships that we have with folks like the Northwest Seaport Alliance. The terminals that we chose to be partners with, the SPITC terminal here in Ho Chi Minh, the intercity terminal, originally Terminal 30 in Seattle. Both of those ports had the ability to accept smaller feeder class vessels, which is what we wanted to provide in the industry. So all of our three vessels are feeder class size, approximately 2,500 TEUs, nimble, flexible, fast. With regards to guarantees, when we started the service, we found ourselves in a time period where the market had skyrocketed. Everybody remembered that rates went from about $1,500 to $20,000 to the US West Coast. And everybody was clamoring for space. And we wanted to create an environment where a contract meant something. Everybody signs contracts with the alliance carriers, and as of today, it's a bit of a formality. If the market happens to skyrocket, there's a chance that there are going to be hard conversations one way or the other. And at the same time, as the market declines, importers itself will come back and try to renegotiate those contracts. What we wanted to do was create a very flexible model. We wanted to be able to provide contracts as block space agreements, all the way down to kind of traditional carrier contracts that everybody is used to. So what I mean by block space agreements is, if you sign up for X amount of containers per sailing, we guarantee we will have that equipment for you. And if for some reason we are unable to fulfill that commitment, we will actually refund you the full amount of agreed upon ocean freight value in our contract based on our shortfall. So there's skin in the game on our side as your carrier.
We went out and we actually purchased all of brand new equipment. We've got 6,000 containers in rotation at the moment. A lot of the containers that you'll see here, bright green, UWL, a ton of investment from our organization from an equipment standpoint. The last piece of this is speed. We had to be as fast or the fastest in the market between Vietnam and the U.S. West Coast and Seattle. I mentioned here earlier about the partnerships between SPITC as well as Seattle, T18 and T30. You heard in the panelist session about partnerships and relationships. I think that the key takeaway that we'll touch on here as a differentiator here in a few seconds is we value your opinion and we want to hear your opinion. We want to listen. Where are your pain points and how can we help you fix that? That's really what we created this service around, was a few strategic partners. One is in the room here today, where they were having problems and we were able to come up with a solution to solve those problems at that time. And we have built out the service quite successfully here over the last 2.5 years. So a couple of the key differentiators. Why the Pacific Northwest? In John's presentation, the customer service and the level of service that we have gotten from them has been impeccable. Fantastic relationship between our two organizations. Additionally, with Union Pacific, it's worked out extremely well for us to be able to, what started out as just a pure port-to-port shuttle service, to be able to now offer inland rail service to U.S. Midwest locations. And another reasoning for why the Port of Seattle was there was room for us to grow. LA Long Beach had inevitably, it seems, and I don't want to knock on LA Long Beach at all. Obviously, it's a very, very pivotal port for the U.S. economy and a port that UWL uses on a daily basis. But throughout the years, we've seen issues with congestion at the Port of LA Long Beach. And we have not necessarily seen that with the Port of Seattle. And so we were able to get an expedited berthing agreements within 24 hours in Seattle, which is really kind of unheard of for carriers here today. Tom, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You really kind of touched on it, in the beginning of the presentation, between the partnership, the extended contract between UWL and Swire.
Yeah, so exactly that. The length of the contract and the kind of horizons that we have between UWL and Swire Shipping, and then also the model, the ownership model. So Swire Shipping is a ship owner, 52 vessels, 81,000 TEU kind of global capacity. 3 of those ships absolutely committed to this service. We're not going anywhere. And between us and UWL, we own the ships, the trucks, the warehousing. So we've got that assurity of supply. We've got the physical infrastructure. And then you couple that with the long-term mindset of the two entities involved, UWL and Swire Shipping, the long time frames, the family ownership, and I think clearly echoed in the attitude of our supplier colleagues with NWSA in particular just now. Like, we're all on the same page, looking to solve customers' problems, your problems, for the long haul.
And I think with the hands-on approach here, one example that I would like to give to the audience is I was sitting in front of a very large importer, introducing the service to them, and their feedback was, Chris, this all sounds great, but how much influence can we have on your service? And our response to them was, how much influence would you like to have on the service? We are here to cater to you. If you have a gap in your supply chain that is a massive issue, we would love to hear about it, and we'd love to create a solution potentially for that gap. And that's where we've been really able to grow over the last 2.5 years, as well as providing a number of the items here listed on the slide as part of this premium service that we offer to our customers. And with that, a lot of times, depending on the size of your organization, you may or may not have direct access to senior leadership within the organization. And that's where we really want to get to know our customers from the top of our organization, allowing them the ability to have direct access and conversations with our heads of trade, with our president of our company, and having that, it's so valuable to be able to have those types of relationships, as the panelists alluded to really earlier today.
And I've got just two things to kind of dovetail onto that. First is a kind of Peter Tirschwell, David Skillen-esque kind of stat attack. So Swire Shipping, as I said, 52 ships, 81,000 TEU capacity. I think some of you will know MSC, over 800 ships, 5.6 million TEU capacity. Swire Shipping is 0.3% of the global market. MSC more like 20%. So we're at scale, we're big, but we're small enough to still remember who you are and to listen to you and realize that we only exist because of you. And that is a key thing for us, and that's what gives us that kind of closeness, that proximity to customer, and the ability to listen to you, and as Chris said, respond to you. And then going back to kind of the point I made at the start about UWL and what it is that they bring to the table that we don't have as Swire Shipping. As I said, we're relatively new in the US market. We're a long kind of history in the Asia market, but new in the US. And in UWL, we recognize a partner that's got, in particular, the people on the ground to know and listen to the customers at the US end and really connect the dots. And that's something that's invaluable for us in this ongoing partnership.
And so this is how, if you recall, it just started out as a direct shuttle service between Seattle and Vietnam. And over the last 2.5 years, we've been able to develop this and grow this product to really a Southeast Asia hub and spoke model, with Vietnam being that hub for us, with the mother vessel being the last port of call before the eastbound haul, and still heading into to Terminal 30. Actually, we started out at Terminal 30, and as we expanded into the IPI model, and for the folks who are unfamiliar with the terminology of IPI, effectively an inland point in the U.S. Midwest, such as Chicago or Kansas City or Memphis, we optimized the service for our customer base to provide improved transit times. So we actually switched from Terminal 30 to Terminal 18 in Seattle, which had a Union Pacific on-dock rail, which allowed us to then expedite inland rail service to our Midwestern customers. And then Tom mentioned the relationship with Westwood. Obviously, Swire purchased Westwood here about 1.5 years ago now, and Westwood has a northbound service from Seattle, Terminal 18, to Fraser Surrey Docks in Vancouver. And it allowed us to really kind of optimize that transshipment and be able to provide the fastest shipment, fastest transit time from Ho Chi Minh to the Port of Vancouver of any carrier today. So that's how we were able to really also help out our Canadian customers. And then going back to Tom's comment on longevity, one of the big questions that I think that I've been asked over the last couple of years is, well, what's the longevity of the service? Is this a flash in the pan? We've seen all of these entrants into the market, and effectively they've all gone away. Are you guys going away? And I think the westbound service is a testament for us saying, no way, we're here for the long term. So what we learned as we developed this service is the demand for really kind of refrigerated cargo out of the Pacific Northwest to locations like Korea and Vietnam itself. So the apple market, proteins. And so again, as we were looking at optimizing our sailing schedule, we realized that we could add Busan as a port of call without hurting our schedule integrity. So currently today, we're handling a majority of the apple market from the Pacific Northwest into Korea and Vietnam, as well as a lot of proteins. So today, the Seattle to Busan 12 days is the fastest in the market for that service. I highlighted a little bit on the temperature-controlled resources that we have. So depending on the size of the vessel that we have in the rotation or that you would be booked on, we have around 270, 280 plugs per sailing, with these really being the kind of core commodities that we're catering to here today out of the United States. And to kind of talk a little bit about what John started and we talked about a little earlier today on sustainability. Sustainability is a ever-growing important conversation with the majority of importers and exporters in the United States. And so wanted to allow Tom the opportunity to talk a little bit about Swire's sustainability efforts in particular to this service.
Yeah, so starting with this service, as I said, three ship service, the 3 vessels that we operate on this 2400, 2750 TEU vessels, they're all 2020 built, so they're kind of best in class, eco-friendly, scrubber fitted. You know, they're still bunkering traditional fuels as almost all vessels on the ocean are today, but they're doing it as kind of efficiently and sort of with the minimum carbon impact that's really possible with vessels of their size today. And that's kind of a feature of our fleet and our fleet renewal program kind of across the business. And sustainability for us as a business is kind of very much, it sounds like a cliche, but it's also a truism. It's very much at the heart of everything we do. Swire Shipping is a member of the McKinney Moller Center for Zero Carbon Growth, a strategic partnership, not for profit, looking at kind of solutions, innovative solutions, both on the technology side and also on the governance side for the shipping industry as a whole, kind of working towards those industry ambitions of zero carbon, working with partners kind of from different parts of the industry, the American Bureau of Shipping, AP Moller Maersk, Siemens Energy, and Total Energies, just to name a few. So we're kind of combining with stakeholders all across the industry to look at what we can do further. But I think the next slide just emphasizes the 3 vessels we've got, and you won't be able to see the detail of the stats, but they're as good as they get for vessels of this size operating on this route.
Yeah, and one of the great things about this is we do have the opportunity now here in Q1 where we are piloting some biofuels on a number of our sailings. So taking that next step with the industry to really drive that biofuel sustainability effort.
I think that's a very good point. It's something that our customers are asking for. We've heard other speakers today talk about green corridors, but Chris is right. We are looking to trial biofuels in 2024 in 2 locations across the Swire Shipping network. One is down on our coastal business in New Zealand, and one is on this Trans-Pacific Express service, which can bring down the carbon impact kind of quite dramatically. It will involve an investment from our side, but we see customers showing willing in that direction, and we'll reach agreement as to how we kind of get that started in 2024. The other thing with this service, 3 ship fortnightly at the moment, but we'd love to go to 6 and make it weekly. And then the kind of the environmental impact aspect is quite interesting because you've then got a product that's so reliable that it can compete with air freight. And the global shipping industry, 3% share of carbon emissions worldwide is substantial, but it's a much lower share kind of per ton of freight moved than the aviation industry. So the more we can do to help people transition their supply chains from air to sea, that has a positive impact on the environment overall. So a product like this, where we really do what we say on the tin, you know, if we can get to weekly, we keep that 18-day transit time between the kind of 2 base ports, and add the extra ships, then you've got something that says, hey, we can move more off the planes and onto the ships, and that's a good thing for everybody.
And with regards to kind of performance, obviously the proof is in the pudding, as we say, you know, in the U.S. This is just kind of an example of our number of sailings and the number of blank sailings against the competition in that same corridor. And then Tom just mentioned, you know, the transit times, and so you might see here that out of Ho Chi Minh, we are hands down the fastest by far to the Port of Seattle than our nearest competition. With Haiphong, there has been some new entrants into that market that has certainly closed that gap. But you know, as you can see, the reliability piece, just the steady eddy, you can set it and forget it from a purchasing standpoint with your supply chain is really what we're going for. And you can see here, so April, why it says April to November, April was actually the month where we transitioned from Terminal 30 to Terminal 18 in Seattle. Thus, with the on-dock rail, we wanted to have that start date for these stats. But you can see Ho Chi Minh to Seattle. We post an 18-day transit on our website. We have absolutely nailed it. And Haiphong's a 21-day transit posted on the website, and it's at 20.8 days on average. So this is the other thing that we are obviously very proud of here this past year. The ports of Seattle and Tacoma awarded us the North Star Award, the Cargo Anchor Award for recognition for initiative growth into, or innovative growth into the Pacific Northwest. And so something we're very, very proud of, and thank the folks at Northwest Seaport Alliance for their partnership. And that's really the end of our presentation. And so Tom and I are happy to accept any questions that you may have. And if you have any questions you think of later, certainly find us, and we'll be happy to answer.
Yes, thank you for your interesting presentation, Chris. I just wonder, now you have the direct service from Ho Chi Minh, the city port, the transit time to the US Northwest is very competitive compared with the competitor. But for the market recovery for this year, we expect that. Do you think that you have any challenge with if you have any plan to upsize the vessel, and whenever you upsize the vessel, if any challenge with the terminal in the city? And yeah. And you also mentioned that you may add the Busan on the way to the US. I think that is very good idea that you can increase let's say the economy of scale or the unit cost compared with the other operator. Let's say they deploy the vessel 8,000 TEU from here to the US at the minimum, but you just 2,500 something. That I think that the slot cost of you should be very high compared with the other competitor. So this is something that you can share that any plan from your Swire Shipping and UWL in this year. Yeah,
Chris,
yeah.
I'm happy to take the question on slot cost and also on tonnage. So first thing is, if we need more ships, we've got more ships. So there's not going to be a capacity problem on this trade on vessels. And as NWSA made very clear, there's no capacity problem at the port. So we don't see any issue there. In terms of slot cost, you touched on an interesting point. Obviously, the size of these vessels is significantly smaller than a lot of the vessels operating on the Transpac trade, but it's a different product. And I think those of you involved with supply chains know that the cost of freight is not the same as the total cost of your supply chain. So we knowingly have a solution that is more expensive, it is premium, but we firmly believe that it reduces the cost of our customers' supply chain because they can manage their inventory better. They have that predictability and reliability. So I think if the pressures that have been kind of talked at length do escalate over 2024, I see this product becoming more relevant, not less relevant.
Yeah, thank you. Just because you see that the carrier now, even though the interest, they also want to upsize the vessel. And I fully agree with you, whenever the market go, you can add more tonnage. But this is depending the company plan or the strategy, deploy which kind of vessel or which size vessel is most optimal or suitable for the company to serving maybe your old customer in the
Well, for this particular trade, we wouldn't upsize the vessel size because the service differentiator is about the vessel speed. So if we wanted to improve this particular product offering, we'd add vessels of the same size and improve frequency. So there's two ways to build capacity, right? Either bigger ships or more ships. This would be a more ships solution.
Okay, thank you.
Hey guys, we're already starting to see some equipment challenges in Asia and Asia, especially for the long-haul carriers going into Europe and going into North America, of course. But even in the intra-Asia space, we're starting to see some of that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do differently to manage that equipment flow between Vietnam and Seattle and back, that as importers or exporters in this trade lane, you know, of course, everyone I think should be concerned going into this contract season about equipment flow, not just space, but equipment. What are you guys doing differently to make sure that you've got equipment on the ground in Ho Chi Minh and Haiphong when customers need it?
Well, Tom, I'd certainly, if you can help add to this. Michael, I've not been on the carrier side to ever necessarily give you a really solid answer, maybe like, you know, David Skillen might be able to on how one of the alliance carriers manages their equipment flows. But certainly I think that the closed loop service is vital to ensuring that we have the right equipment in the right locations. You know, at the same time, it's purely collaboration, right? And the dashboards and the communication that we have on a daily basis with not only our trade teams but with Swire. And if and when there has been a pinch point to where we felt like we may be running low, then we have had that communication preemptively, and then we've worked with Swire to ensure that boxes get routed accordingly in order to provide the service that we guarantee that we're going to provide. If you
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question, Michael. You've hit the nail on the head. It's the closed loop nature of the container fleet. So you may remember from earlier in the slide, the containers are primarily owned by UWL, not Swire Shipping, on this service. So Swire Shipping obviously has a substantial fleet of containers that we operate globally, and there are enough touch points between our global network and this service that if we wanted to utilize those containers on this service, we could, but we've chosen not to, because we want to keep it closed loop, because we don't want to risk the integrity of the product. And the product is not just about the ships leaving on time. It is pointless if the ships leave on time and there's no containers for you to pack into. So it's the fact that we've deliberately isolated this product, kept this fleet of containers dedicated to this closed loop of customers, and that is something that's going to give us surety of supply that, again, as the panelists touched on, we don't know what's going to happen with flows throughout 2024, but it's probably not going to be better than it is now. So that surety of supply is something that will be useful for you exporters here in Vietnam, in particular in 2024.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing the very impressive presentation. So I'm kind of impressed on the transit time from Vietnam to US. So my question is, so regarding the short transit time, so is it kind of any kind of, how about the rate? So kind of, is it comparable to other carriers or not? And my second question is, do we have any plans to have the shipments from China to US? Yeah.
Bit of a loaded question, I like that. So to answer the question, in my opinion, we have been extremely competitive with the alliance carriers on the rates on our service here today, even though our product, in my opinion, is exponentially better. And really a couple of pieces on that. One is, it's still a very new product, right? For the first year of the service, some people were very adoptive. Some people wanted to wait and see, right? Let's see if this company is going to be around for year 2 and beyond before really kind of jumping in and signing contracts and doing that type of thing. And so I think that at this point, coming into this contract season, being at contract year 3 for the service, the service has got a reputation now where it almost speaks for itself. If you look at the Global Liner Performance Report put out by Sea Intelligence on a monthly basis, for effectively the last 5 months, we've had a 100% on-time performance report. And so people are really starting to notice that. And so I guess the bottom line of that question is, are we more expensive than the alliance carriers? Yes, absolutely. It's more expensive to operate this service and to provide this service based on smaller ships, faster service. We're not stopping at a ton of different ports using a 13,000 container vessel. We've got a small vessel that's in a closed loop service, and we want to provide really 3 key pillars that the alliance carriers haven't been able to perform in the last number of years. And so it costs more to operate, thus it will be slightly more than the traditional container costs that everyone may be used to.
I think there was a question in there about whether we'd have a comparable service out of China.
Correct, I forgot. Yes,
We'll,
thank you.
I mean, we keep our eyes open to all opportunities, but I think unlikely. The kind of port congestion dynamics down the east coast of China, quite different. I think it'd be pretty hard to hold to this kind of reliable product, and then you'd possibly just end up with a more expensive product than the traditional large carriers into the west coast. But never say never.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a different product, right? And that's kind of what we've had the conversation with some of our larger customers to date is, well, maybe this isn't a fit for Sunchief, but as we continue to evolve, as the Sunchief service becomes weekly and we have 6 vessels, what's next? How do we grow it next? We probably wouldn't add more stops because then it would hurt the schedule integrity of the service. But maybe we create a similar type of model in other ports throughout Asia. I think that all of that is kind of on the table, and where we really want to have those collaborative conversations with our customers. One more?
Full disclosure, my company uses this service, but I would like to congratulate you, Chris, and Swire on setting up this service with your partners throughout North America, who are obviously identified a gap and took steps together to form a very, very, very supportive service to Vietnam. Not only is your transit time fast, it's stable. And as the Swire gentleman has touched on, this allows people to plan an alternative type of transport. We don't necessarily need the fastest, we need the most stable. And having been involved with my company since it was $1.9 billion, it's now a $14 billion company over the last 17 years, I think I can count the shipping lines on the fingers of half of one of my hands who have tried to improve the stability. For various reasons, they are different organizations. So I think this is an extremely positive step for businesses in Vietnam. And I think it's an identification of a product that we want. I think a lot of shippers want this, including shippers who ship higher value goods than my company, and they can switch air freight onto it. So I congratulate you, and selfishly speaking, I look forward to an expansion of the services in Vietnam. Thank you. That's all I want to say.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Alan. And I think that I want to tie on to one piece of kind of what you just mentioned, and then there was another question that kind of made me think about this is we don't want to necessarily replace your alliance carriers. We want to be a tool in the toolbox because we're a totally different service than that. We're not going to be the Maersk of the world, right? We want to maintain that small size vessel, nimble, flexible, to be able to be that deferred air freight provider, that reliable provider in your supply chain, that you can carve out a piece of your supply chain and have that reliability. I think that's a key takeaway that I wanted to share with everybody as well today. Thank you all very, very much for your time. Appreciate it. And then one thing, before Sloder jumps on here and talks about Union Pacific, after Sloder's session is over, we do have lunch for everybody. The staff will need to come in and fix the tables and clean the tables up to be able to serve lunch. So if we could ask after Sloder's presentation if everybody could step out and grab a water, we'll get the room flipped over and be able to serve everybody lunch here in just a second.
Chào quý chớ. Am I pronouncing it correctly? May go hey Hoehn. How are you, right? Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. Ladies and gentlemen, government representatives of both sides, industry elites and veterans, My name is Sloder Khan. Today, I'm very privileged to be probably the only railroad representative in this event on behalf of Union Pacific. But I'm also humbled because obviously most of you are more intelligent and industry expertise than I do. So my function here today is not only on behalf of Union Pacific, but also on behalf of the whole railroad industry of the United States and North America to explain how important you are to us and how we can serve you to meet your purpose. My title of this subject is Rail Intermodal, Circulating Trade Arteries, Boosting Economy Acupoint. I made of this subject myself because I think in Asia, many people believe in herbal medicine or ancient way of medicine. So in the ancient way, we believe our body is a whole organization. So every part of our body looks like work separately with different functions, but actually all for the collective goods of the whole body. It's very similar to logistic, and supply chain today. Because under globalization, each country may have their specialties of import or export, but they all eventually need each other. So railroad is only one part of it. So I personally feel like the railroad, just like the arteries in the body that circulate, the trade, when it comes to the inland. So, and the port is like the acupoint of the body. So specific port, like NWSA, may function as a very strategic acupoint when it comes to economy, when it comes to trade. So hopefully we will function ourselves well for the benefit of the globalization and the trade and the economy of each country. Since we're a little bit running out of time, I may speed up my slides, and I may if necessary, I may jump on the stage, not because I'm too hungry, but I just want to make sure. My topic will be divided by 4. The first one will be the state of intermodal rail in North America. And the second will be the benefits, which I use the phrase 3C, capacity, cost, and carbon of intermodal rail. The third part will be a basic introduction of railroad, Union Pacific Railroad connectivity, and what it's doing good for specifically PNW route, and specifically for our partners here. And last but not least, I will elaborate Union Pacific's climate action and its strategy. This is the map of North American freight rail network. It's provided by the Association of American Railroads, AAR, which most of the railroads in America is part of the members. So as you can see, there are tons of rail tracks and network with different colors. It just really looks like the blood tubes of our body, right? So it really circulates, what we need in terms of nutrition. Overall freight rail network, there are nearly 140,000 miles covering all the 49 states on the mainland of the United States and the District of Columbia. So you can say, all of them. It moved 19.3 billion tons of cargo in 2020. I have some numbers for your comparison. When Swire Shipping mentioned their container ship is 2750 TEU ship, I checked online their net tonnage, which means the pure cargo tonnage is around 12,000 tons. So if we divide 19.3 billion tons by 12,000 tons, that would be slightly over 1.6 million ships of Swire Shipping. So that means a lot of cargo and a lot of demand potential for a company like Swire Shipping to grow. What does it mean for NWSA? I checked online. In 2020, NWSA's throughput tonnage was around 26 million tons. So if we divide by 19.3, for a year, we have 733 years. Vietnam's 2022 seaport throughput tonnage is around 730 million tons. Of course, half of them probably contributed by Ho Chi Minh, the port complex. If we divide by 19.3 billion, that would be 26 years to match 19.3 billion tons of cargo. So that's a very gigantic market and demand for all the supply chain contributors and providers to pursue. So just now I overheard Chris and Tom mention they're currently still a niche provider, but who knows? You know, I remember 160 years ago, Union Pacific started as a passenger train, you know, moving from the west and to the east for, you know, the American people. And I forgot to introduce myself. Before joining Union Pacific in early 2020, I've worked for a Taiwan-based shipping line for slightly over 20 years. So that Taiwanese shipping line started in 1968 with just one bare small bulk ship, and then eventually become one of the top 5 shipping companies in the world. So that means everything is possible. We just need to keep, you know, pursuing and keep growing. When we talk about the definition of the railroads, there are 3 types. Class 1 railroads used to be 7, now becomes 6 after 2023 when CP merged KCS. And their definition is usually their revenue, annual revenue is around $900 million each. And their capacity is about 92,000 miles, which is 67% of the total rail. Their employee, 122,000 plus, which is 87% of total freight railroads headcounts. So these 6 major class 1s is constructing the basic network structure for the US land and also the North America. There are also smaller, which is class 2, class 3, we call them short line railroads. Well, there are hundreds of them. There are 615 railroads of them, and they run about 33% of the rest of the network. There is also one passenger-only railroad, which is called Amtrak. They used to do some partial freight shipment in the past before 2020, but then it stopped. And it's 96% relying on other railroads' network to move passenger around the country. So this is how it looks for the North America and particularly US railroad. Talking about the state of intermodal rail in North America, let's look at the volume. On the left-hand side, again, is provided by AAR for the last week of December and also the whole accumulation of the whole 2023. As you can see, the circle, the red circle line, that's the total intermodal units, which is slightly over 17 million units. And you can see it's a minus 5.7% growth. So we're eventually still in deficit in terms of the whole intermodal volume. I checked online, I remember Vietnam is also promoting the intermodal shipment. And last year, I think, or the year before, I think their annual growth is 6%. And I think that momentum will continue. So in other words, it's still a very energetic market and a transportation mode. And you can see all the other commodities, which we call them a bulk or carload commodity, they are also slightly over 17 million units. So in other words, the total rail, US rail or North American rail cargo structure, they're 50-50. 50 intermodal or container shipment, and 50 others will be the bulk cargoes. If we talk about North American intermodal volume during 2013 through 2023, this number is not completed yet because the provider IANA, which is another organization for most of the intermodal stakeholders, their number only update to November. So if we look at the past 10 years, you can see the volume peaked at 2018 and then gradually coming down, and then another peak in 2021 due to the pandemic rush, but then coming down again. And most likely, according to AAR's number, 2013 won't be anything better. So, but the interesting part is the yellow portion, the blue portion, which is the international intermodal, which means your cargo on Swire Shipping's ship or UWL's service coming to NWSA discharge and then directly move into inland. We call them international intermodal. And the orange part is the domestic intermodal, which would be transloaded into 53 container or trailers and then handled by truck over the road or railroad continue into the inland. So you can see over the past very long time is usually 50-50 until the pandemic years. The international intermodal volume share dropped below 50%. Why? Obviously, there are many factors. For example, the reposition of empty containers for shipping line, they probably want to rush their empties back to Asia as soon as possible. So at the same time, they may be reluctant to take more IPI cargo as they've supposed to. And then also because of the e-commerce rush, many retailers decide to transload or redistribute their cargo at the port area, port warehouse, which caused the congestion, of the port, and also the congestion of the warehouse, and also the shortage of truck drivers. So all in all, there's a reason for that, but we're seeing, generally over the 10 years, the overall intermodal unit is stably in between 17 million ballpark. Now we talk about one of the 3 C's, which is capacity. One rail car can take up to 286,000 pounds of cargo. That equals 3 to 4 truckloads. So in other words, in my opinion, a railroad is just another container ship for you, only on the inland side. Because we obviously move a lot of containers at the same time without more drivers or more trucks on the road. So the unit cost will be lower. So the burden to the whole society infrastructure will be lower as well. The second C is the cost. According to S&P, Journal of Commerce report, the latest report, on the right-hand side, their report's name is called Intermodal Savings Index. Am I right, Peter? Thank you. Their latest report shows that comparing between pure truck and the intermodal, there's a almost 26% savings on intermodal contract rates and almost 17% savings on intermodal spot rates, which means no matter contract or spot, when you use intermodal rail or intermodal trucking, you are far better off than just simply using a pure truck. The third C would be carbon. Of course, everybody is talking about carbon sustainability nowadays. Keep in mind, maritime shipping is only probably single-digit % of the whole global carbon emission. I know like everybody, when they sell their shipping product to their customer, they would say that too. The same, rail transportation is only also 2% of the whole transportation in the United States in terms of carbon emission. So because we're 3 to 4 times more fuel efficient than trucks, so in other words, if we remove 10% of the truckloads from the highways, that would create 75% less carbon footprint and equals 17 million tons of CO2 emissions. And that's almost like removing 3.4 million cars from the highways a year, and also like planting 262 million trees to our environment. So in other words, the more you use rail intermodal, the more green you are. You know, that's something we all need to pursue. Then we talk about Union Pacific Railroad. Union Pacific is one of the vintage companies in the United States. It's established in over 160 years ago, partly helped by our early establishers of United States. One of them is President Lincoln. You know, he signed a law, and that helped to create Union Pacific to connect the East to the West. So over the 160 years, our main goal, our slogan of the company is building America. So how we build America? As you can see, the orange line are all UP's network. So our route miles is slightly over 32,000, covering 23 states or 2/3 of the US lands west from the Mississippi River. And we currently have around 33,000 employees and 10,000 customers and 7,000 in locomotives and 56,000 freight cars. To be noted, actually not all the rail cars or intermodal rail cars are owned by the railroads, no matter it's Union Pacific or other railroads. We don't own all the rail cars. So when people talk about rail car shortage, sometimes we could not control because we don't own them. So the most important thing is to balance. You know, so just like shipping line, they fully loaded on the strong leg, you know, from Vietnam to US to Seattle, but they may have to, you know, carry most of the empties back to Asia. You know, so that creates imbalance for them in the cost perspective. To railroads as well, you know, we move your cargo, your containers from port to the inland, but if you don't send them back to the same port, that creates imbalance. Then that creates shortage of rail cars, you know. So our connectivity is technically we can connect all the other railroads in the North America. And we also can connect 6 major gateways to Mexico. You know, Mexico is another hot spot, just like Vietnam. Vietnam is benefiting from friendly shoring, and Mexico is benefited from nearshoring nowadays. So they have a lot of export, you know, from Mexico into the United States and Canada. Talking about Mexico slightly, there are 2 major railroads in Mexico. One of them is Ferromex, which Union Pacific owns 26% of share. So in other words, we are very strategic partners to provide service in and out of Mexico. Investment, you know, just like shipping lines, we're a heavy metal industry. We have to input a lot of money on the equipment, facility, and based on the past 5 years, averagely $3.2 billion each year have been invested into either infrastructure, locomotives, equipment, capacity, facilities, and technology. And all of them equals less, no less than 13–15% of our total revenue. Talking about intermodal facility investments, we currently are working on 12 major facility projects across our territory, and one new facility to be introduced in 2024, which is Phoenix. So in other words, we can accommodate most shippers' need, either majority needs or alternative need, wherever you want to go. And we also work on some new equipment, like new cranes or new machines for each of the facility. This is not really related to P&W route, but I just quickly go through. We added Houston Port on dock last year, and we work with other railroads, CN and Ferromex, on the Falcon Premium Service connecting Mexico, USA, and Canada. And we also work with Ferromex on our original Mexico and the US premium service. So in other words, we are trying hard to cover everywhere we could. Talking about the P&W supply and demand. I mean, obviously, during the COVID years, there's the huge tumble down of volume and then huge rebound back. So everybody was suffering this kind of earthquake. P&W used to suffer a lot because first, it's not major port complex like LA Long Beach. So because of the capacity, sometimes the up and down would be more significant. But after last year, especially last summer, there was a strike in Canada, the ILW strike, and then shippers started to switch their volumes down to the nearest the port, which is NWSA complex. So we did enjoy some rebound, significant rebound, entering Q3, Q4. Which is good. But when it comes to a certain uplift of volume, some disruption may occur. So during the moment of time, we work closely with port people, with the terminal people, with our logistic partners on their supply and demand on a day-to-day basis, trying to move around the available rail cars to the place where it's needed. So overall, it's not too bad compared with what is happening during 2021, 2022 in the PSW port. But I think no matter which industry, a stable supply and demand is very important. Everybody expects consistency. So if you want balance and if you want consistency, then you need to have a very stable service from your logistic provider. So UP's P&W serviceability, from Seattle, Tacoma, we have 7 destination markets in the inland. And we enjoy the 4 P&W on-dock terminals, that NWSA is providing us. So just like John mentioned earlier, with on-dock rail, everything moves faster onto the rail and moved into the inland. For export business from these inland area, UP have UP Match Bags program, and we have Chicago Agricultural Transload Facility, And we also have Pocatello in Idaho for the agricultural export. The partnership with Westwood Swire and UWL at Seattle 18 is started in last year. And it worked out very fine, very good. And I am in Asia, so every week or every 2 weeks, I will be collecting an IPI volume data from the UWL people. And they provided very stable and consistent volume forecast for us, which is very helpful for the next step service provider, which is the railroad. So we really appreciate, you know, their consistency. UP's recent investment to support P&W growth. I just mentioned earlier, the GFO, which is the name of our Chicago International Intermodal Facility. We have a agricultural transload facility inside the terminal. The concept is, you know, when shipping lines or importers import their containers into Chicago area, and then the consignee empty the containers, and to avoid empty reposition back to the port, we provide the empty usage for some agricultural exporters to use. In this case, it's Viterra, you know, and it's Viterra, you know, they are using this empty containers to export. So that works out well. Not 100%, you know, empty containers can be utilized at this moment, but we look forward to more utilization. The second one is TCIT, St. Paul, Minnesota. It's opened in the end of 2022, a year ago. And it's a new market for UP, as we didn't have an intermodal facility in the past. And then the Pocatello, Idaho matchback, completed in 2021. It's dedicated to P&W ports. So it's a collaboration between NWSA and Savage and the UP, and which can handle over 15,000 units per year. Talking about U.S. export, you know, people, especially shipping lines, worry about, you know, their empty reposition, their empty, you know, utilization. So we provide the domestic ISO reload program, which is called DRP, or matchback, match UP. Is that we provide opportunities in major inland hubs, connecting with the local export BCOs, to use these empty containers, and through the technology help of Bloom Global, to book the containers and used by the IMC companies, which is intermodal marketing companies, just like 3PL logistics company. They will use these ocean containers for the domestic usage and then back to the port. Currently, there are some matchbacks programs, a list of them. So you can see on the color, the major inland hubs, they all have certain export matchback programs for customers to use. And we certainly want people to make the best usage of them. Finally, the climate action strategy. Union Pacific is going through the transition period. During this period of time, our locomotives trying hard to use new biofuel and some new alternative fuels or some electronic locomotives. So we are hoping to achieve 26% reduction by 2030, and then finally 2050 to carbon neutral. I think most of the companies in this industry are doing the same thing, trying, you know, alternative fuel, trying alternative ways But as you know that it's a heavy metal industry, I mean, everything is very heavy, so sometimes new fuel or electric locomotive, it takes time for the technology advancement to really carry these heavy cargoes. So we're still trying hard, started from short distance, maybe inside a facility for the cargo switch. We use some new equipment or electronic equipment. And in the long run, we definitely want to do more new energy. We've also allocated nearly $600 million. It's called a green bond allocation. Invested them in green-related projects like facilities, equipment, locomotives, and energy usage. So in order to help us to achieve the goal of neutral emission. So again, I said in the beginning, rail only stands for 2% of the total transportation in the U.S. sector. So we are not the major polluter, put it this way, but we're still trying hard to keep up the speed to be part of the global sustainability. So UP customers, just by using UP's rail service, have avoided 23.4 million metric tons of GHG emissions in 2022. So that shows how sustainable you can do, in order to be part of your sustainability program. Finally, I want to introduce our new CEO. He took the position in August last year. His name is Jim Vena. Mr. Jim Vena, he started his railroad career with Canadian National as a brakeman. So he started from the basic job of a railroader. I heard yesterday that one of our commissioner, Mr. John McCarthy, he started as a longshoreman at the port. So that means something, because when you started your career from the basic, you really know what people are doing. So, along the way, you become more considerate, and so he held several positions, managerial, executive position in CN, and then became UP's COO during 2019 through 2021. So after he succeeded the CEO position in UP last year, his slogan is safety plus service and operational excellence. So he puts safety at the first priority because as an operational guy, he wants every employee to go home safely. So in other words, if every employee is safe home, then every cargo we handle will be safe to the destination as well. So with this mentality, he believes only by achieving safety and the service and operational excellence, we can win customers' business and trust, and that's how we grow. So I think that's very important, for the logistic world, because we all want to see our customers' cargo, in safe hands. Yeah. Finally, I try to learn the New Year. I think it's called Chumang Namoy. Correct? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and distinguished speaker. My name is Shannon Rowe. I'm a commercial officer with the U.S. Commercial Service here at the Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City. And as we come to the end of today's program, I would like to express my gratitude to each and every one of you for making this event an outstanding success. Throughout this morning, we have had the privilege of hearing from industry experts representing organizations including UWL, Swire Shipping, the Journal of Commerce by S&P Global, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, Union Pacific, and Ashley Furniture. Their invaluable insights have provided a comprehensive understanding of the current state of the U.S. economy, U.S.-Vietnam trade, and containerized trade outlook moving forward, including the dynamics of the Pacific Northwest Gateway. I'd also extend my sincere appreciation to our keynote speaker, Mr. Chang-min Chang from MOIT, for sharing his expertise and unwavering support of the international trade relations, and particularly the U.S.-Vietnam relationship. So thank you very much. To all of our participants, thank you for your active engagement, insightful questions, and enthusiasm throughout this event. The relationships that are forged here today and the ideas exchanged will undoubtedly contribute to continuing to grow the success of the U.S.-Vietnam trade partnership. On behalf of all of our organizers, I'd express my gratitude once again. I hope you enjoyed this morning's program, and I hope that the insights that you gained today can help to guide you in your future endeavors. So before I hand it back over to Chris, I'll just close by saying thank you. So, xin cảm ơn, hẹn gặp lại các quý vị.
Shannon. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We certainly hope that it was valuable time spent, and thank you for traveling, a lot of you from very far places. A couple of items before we close up. I mentioned lunch. We will have lunch, so for all of you who would be able to make it, we'd love to have everybody. We will need to kind of flip the room a little bit here to accommodate lunch, but then before you leave, we've also got gifts for everybody for joining the symposium today. So thank you very much to all the speakers, the panelists, and the folks who really put on this event for us. We appreciate you very much. So thank you.